before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I used to think the worst thing that could happen at an RV park was bad Wi-Fi, or maybe a neighbor who ran their generator too loud. I thought fear was something you left in the cities, where car alarms echoed through concrete canyons and people glanced over their shoulders walking home at night. I thought camping, especially in a classic Volkswagen, was about peace, about getting away from the noise. I thought wrong. It was the summer of last year, June, when the heat hadn't quite choked the air yet, but you could feel it waiting just over the horizon. My partner Ellie and I had been on the road for about 3 months by then, one of those long, wandering trips we always talked about doing, but never had time for until we quit our jobs. We were both in our early 30s, still young enough to feel like life would catch us when we fell, but old enough to start wondering how many times we could test that theory. We'd been staying mostly at state parks, scattered boondocking spots, sometimes the odd parking lot or fairground when funds got low. But this time, we booked something more official, a full-service RV park in northern Arizona. On the map, it looked like a decent place. Not fancy, but shaded, remote, and well-reviewed. Private spaces, showers, electricity. They even had a little pond stocked with fish. It was called Shadow Pines Campground, and if that name sounds like a setup for a bad horror movie, yeah, I thought the same thing. But when you're chasing stars in solitude, a place that isn't overrun with influencers and Instagram hashtags is a welcome find. We rolled in on a Wednesday afternoon after hours of winding through dusty back roads and scrub brush that shimmered under the sun. The Welcome Center was a small A-frame building, the kind that always smells faintly of mildew and air freshener. A middle-aged woman with salt-colored hair greeted us. No name tag, just a worn flannel shirt and a stiff smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're the ones in the Volkswagen, right?" she asked. Her voice was low and rasped, like she'd smoked every day since the Reagan years. "That's us," Ellie said, her usual brightness softening the edge of my growing unease. The woman nodded, handed us a map of the grounds, and pointed to our spot. "You're in Site 17, back corner. Real quiet out there." She paused for a beat, too long, and then added, "Let me know if you hear anything strange at night." I laughed, thinking she was making a joke, but she didn't laugh back. The site was nice, honestly. Nestled beneath a crooked pine tree that looked like it had been twisted by some great, invisible hand. The air smelled clean, earthy. There were only 2 other campers on our loop, an elderly couple in a bulky fifth wheel across the gravel path, and a man in a sleek black Sprinter van parked 4 spots down. He never came out, at least not that we saw. The first night was uneventful. We made tacos on the portable stove and sat in the folding chairs, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The stillness was thick, a kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of your own body. You could hear the wind move through the needles overhead, the occasional rustle in the brush, but no voices. No traffic. No airplanes. Just the slow hum of the forest breathing. We slept with the windows cracked open, letting the cool night air drift through the van. And maybe that's why I heard it so clearly, just past 3 a.m. A knock, not on the van, not exactly. It was more like a tapping sound, sharp, fast, rhythmic. I sat up instantly, instinct flaring before my brain could offer a rational explanation. Ellie stirred beside me, mumbling something about a raccoon, but I wasn't convinced. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded intentional. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out barefoot into the chill. The world outside was ink black, darker than any night I remembered. My beam swept across the trees, the fire pit, the road, nothing. Then I heard it again, this time farther off, somewhere near the tree line. Tap, tap, tap. Not metal, not wood, something softer, like fingers. My skin prickled. I backed toward the van and climbed inside, locking the door behind me. Ellie sat up fully now, her eyes wide. "You heard that too?" "Yeah," I said. "I think we're just not used to how quiet it gets out here. Sound carries weird in places like this." I didn't believe what I said, but I needed to. The next day, we tried to shake it off. Went for a hike. Talked to the old couple across the path, friendly folks from Oregon who said they came here every spring. I asked if they ever heard noises at night, and the man chuckled. Sure, forests always talk. Owls, woodpeckers, sometimes even mountain lions if you're lucky. But the way his wife looked at him, that subtle glance, said she didn't think it was funny. Not entirely. That night it came again. Same time. Tap, 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 only this time it was closer, just outside the van near the rear hatch. I held my breath, didn't move. Ellie clutched my arm hard enough to leave marks. I wanted to look, but something in my gut screamed not to. And then, silence. Total consuming silence. Not the natural kind. This was different, a vacuum. The air felt thicker, heavier, like something was pressing against the skin of the world. When I finally built up the nerve, I peeked out through the slats in the curtain. There was nothing, no tracks, no movement, just the edge of the pine trees swaying under a sky full of stars. But in the dirt behind the van, 3 small indentations. Not footprints, not paw prints. Just 3 perfectly round divots, spaced evenly apart, maybe the size of a quarter. I didn't sleep after that. By day 3, something had shifted. The woods didn't feel welcoming anymore. The air carried a kind of weight, like static before a storm. Even the birds were quieter. We debated packing up and leaving early, but stubbornness, or maybe pride, held us in place. We weren't about to be spooked out of a paid campsite by some overactive imagination. That night, we lit a fire early, letting the flames burn high and bright. It was a kind of warding, I guess, like we were trying to push back the dark. But once the wood burned low and the shadows crept in, the feeling returned. Unease, followed by tension, then suspicion. It was Ellie who saw it first. There, she whispered, pointing toward the brush behind the Sprinter van. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, movement. A pale figure, just barely distinguishable from the dark. Not walking, not crawling, something in between. It shifted low to the ground, limbs oddly bent, like a puppet with tangled strings. I stood up slowly, flashlight in hand, but the beam cut through empty trees. Whatever it was had disappeared. We should go, Ellie whispered. Her voice was trembling now and not from cold. Right now. And for the first time, I agreed. But before we could even reach the van, we heard it again, right behind us. Tap, 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 tap. Like something was letting us know it was there. The sound stopped the moment we turned around. No wind, no animals, not even our own footsteps dared make a sound. The fire was just embers now, casting faint glows across the picnic table and the outlines of our camp chairs. That tapping, it had been close, inhumanly close, as if it had been right behind our ears but vanished the second we acknowledged it. Ellie squeezed my hand, her nails digging into my palm. Get in. Now. We bolted for the van, barely remembering to shove the folding chairs and cooler inside before I slammed the sliding door shut. I started the engine, and the familiar purr of the old Volkswagen gave me a strange sense of comfort, like it was a barrier, some kind of old soul humming beneath us. We didn't say anything at first, just sat there, headlights cutting into the woods, illuminating nothing but empty trees and the empty gravel road stretching toward the front gate. I thought about driving off, just leaving. But something about the way the road curved into the dark felt wrong, like we were being funneled. I turned the engine off. Silence settled again. Then we saw the light. It wasn't from a flashlight. It wasn't the warm yellow from someone's lantern. It was pale, nearly colorless, and it flickered unnaturally, as if it wasn't coming from one source, but several moving at different speeds. We watched, frozen, as it drifted through the trees near the Sprinter van. The black van itself remained still, almost too still, like it was part of the forest now. The light moved behind it and stopped. I tried to justify it, another camper with strange gear, maybe someone out looking for a lost pet, but I couldn't make that make sense. Not that late, not with no sound, not with that kind of light. It didn't feel like it belonged. Ellie whispered, "Why isn't he coming out?" The guy in the Sprinter. We hadn't seen him once since we arrived. 4 days. No door opening, no footsteps, no coffee cups outside. Just a still, silent van. And now, a flickering pale light behind it. We should have left. I know that now. We should have just turned on the engine, headlights be damned, and driven until daylight. But instead, we waited. And eventually we slept, if you can call it that. Fitful half-dreams interrupted by phantom noises and flickers of movement that might have been real or might have been the wind. The next morning, everything looked ordinary. Normal. The kind of normal that makes you question your sanity. The chairs were still folded up near the fire pit. The cooler hadn't been moved. No strange marks on the dirt. No evidence of the tapping or the light. Except for one thing. The Sprinter van was gone. No sound. No engine. No tires on gravel in the night. Just vanished. I walked over to where it had been. There weren't even tracks. Just a clean, untouched patch of gravel where it had sat. Like someone had carefully erased its presence from the ground. Maybe he left early, Ellie offered, but her voice lacked any conviction. I didn't hear anything. Maybe we were asleep. We weren't. And then something caught my eye in the gravel. Not far from where the van had been, more of those 3 round divots, a perfect triangle, like before. But deeper now, like something had settled there longer. I didn't point them out. We both just agreed to pack up and leave. But when we reached the main gate, something odd happened. The road out didn't look the same. It should have been the same dusty stretch we came in on. One long curve past the Welcome Center, then 3 miles of rough terrain until we hit the highway. But now, it was different. The road forked. There were no signs. No map said anything about a split. But there it was, a Y in the gravel. One path veering right, narrow and overgrown. The other left, smooth and freshly packed. "What the hell?" I whispered. Ellie pulled out the campground map, and sure enough, it showed a single exit route. No fork. No alternate path. We waited there, unsure, hoping someone from the office might come out and clarify. But the building was empty. The same woman's truck still sat out front, but the blinds were drawn and the door locked. I finally chose the smoother road, figuring it must be the updated one. Maybe they'd done some maintenance. We drove in silence. 15 minutes, then 20. No highway, no markers, no signal. Trees closed in on both sides, crowding the sky until the light dimmed, and it felt more like dusk than noon. Then the road just ended. Not in a cul-de-sac, not at a barrier or a locked gate. It ended in a clearing, a wide, flat space of red dirt and brush. No signs, no tire tracks, no wind. And at the center of that clearing was the Sprinter van. Empty, doors closed, windows dark. We didn't speak, we didn't get out. I just put the van in reverse and backed out of there like death was watching us through those tinted windows. It took us nearly 2 hours of navigating unmarked paths and circling trees before we found the real road again. The one we came in on. We never saw the fork again. No split, no clearing, just the path that led to the main highway like nothing had changed. When we passed the campground sign on the way out, the big wooden one with shadow pines carved in uneven lettering, something struck me. There were no cars, no campers, no people. The place was empty, like it had been waiting for us to leave. We didn't talk about it for days. When we finally made it out and pulled into a real gas station, the kind with flickering overhead lights and a grimy bathroom that still somehow felt like a sanctuary, I realized my hands were still trembling. Ellie didn't want to get back in the van, not right away. She stood there with her arms crossed, facing the sunset, like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid, something not shifting. "I think it wanted us to find that place," she said eventually. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to, because deep down I agreed with her. That road, the fork, the Sprinter van, it wasn't an accident. We had followed something. Or maybe it had followed us. We took a few nights off the road, stayed at a friend's house in Arizona, someone Ellie knew from her photography days. We said we were just burned out from the trip, that the heat was getting to us, that the desert dust was too much. But at night, when we tried to sleep in their guest room, both of us kept waking up at the same time. 2:37 a.m., always 2:37. And in those minutes of darkness, I would hear faint tapping, soft like fingertips on glass, except there were no windows near the bed. Ellie said she heard it too, but from inside the closet. Always from somewhere just out of view, just out of reach. We finally got back on the road, promising to stick to busy places, KOAs, state parks, anywhere with people. But something had changed. Every time we pulled into a campground, I found myself scanning the other vehicles, looking for dark-tinted windows, listening for silence, watching for black Sprinter vans that never had doors open. One afternoon in Utah, we arrived at a quiet riverside site. Gorgeous in that wide-open, otherworldly way, and as I was backing into our spot, I saw it. 3 round indents in the dry red soil. Perfect triangle, same size, same depth. I didn't tell Ellie. I just moved the van forward a few feet, pretending I'd made a mistake with the angle. But my heart was pounding, and that night, I barely slept. It wasn't until we reached Washington, deep in the pine forests outside of Olympic National Park, that things escalated again. We were meeting up with another couple, Mark and Lydia, fellow van lifers we'd met through a travel forum. They were smart, cautious, and seasoned. Mark used to work in wildlife conservation, and Lydia had been a paramedic. We figured sticking close to them for a bit might help settle our nerves. And it did. For a while. We parked at a small private RV park near the edge of the forest. Only 8 spaces. No hookups. Just a gravel loop and a compost toilet near a tiny ranger station. The owner was an older guy named Thomas, friendly enough, but something about the way he avoided eye contact when we asked about local trails stuck with me. "Stay close to the loop," he muttered. "Don't go wandering after dark." At first, we thought he was just being overcautious. Old guy, probably had too many stories from city folks getting lost in the woods. But then the first night came, and with it, the noises. It wasn't the typical forest chorus. No owls, no wind through the trees. Instead, it was like breathing. Not ours, not Mark's, not Lydia's. It came from the woods, low, deep, like something enormous just outside the tree line, exhaling through old lungs and wet lips. I sat up in the van, listening, holding my breath. It stopped when I moved, but I could feel it, like hot air pressing against the walls of our van, like something testing the barrier. The next morning, I asked Mark if he'd heard anything. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Lydia thought it was a bear, but she's not sure." And that's when I knew something was wrong. Lydia had worked on backcountry rescue teams in Montana and Colorado. She dealt with bears, wolves, even mountain lions. She didn't guess, she knew. And if she wasn't sure, then it wasn't normal. That evening, we made dinner together. Kept things light, tried to ignore the way dusk came too quickly in the trees. But after the dishes were done and we sat around the fire, I noticed something in the dirt. More of those triangle marks, just outside the ring of light. Fresh, too fresh. I leaned in and whispered to Ellie, who followed my eyes, and I saw her face change. Not in fear, exactly, but in realization. Like she'd been hoping she was wrong this whole time. We didn't say anything to Mark and Lydia. Not yet. Not until we were sure. But that night, the breathing came back. This time it circled the camp. You could feel the shift in pressure, like being underwater when something big swims near. Not visible, but undeniably present. At 3 a.m., we all ended up outside at the same time. Mark with a flashlight, Lydia gripping a metal baton, Ellie beside me in a flannel jacket that didn't quite hide how tense she was. We didn't say a word. We just stood there, 4 people surrounded by trees, and listened. The breathing stopped. Then came a whisper. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even in a human voice. It sounded scraped, wet. Like something trying to imitate language it didn't quite understand. It slithered out of the woods, not loud, but everywhere. Inside our ears, inside our ribs. Then silence. Total silence. Until a loud, sharp crack, like a massive branch being snapped, echoed through the woods behind the ranger station. Mark shouted, "Go, now!" And we all ran for our vans. But as I turned to shut the sliding door, I saw something standing in the tree line. Tall, thin, not moving. Its face was wrong. Flat, not like a mask, but like it didn't know how to form one. Its head tilted, slowly. Then it opened its mouth, impossibly wide, and made no sound at all. I slammed the door shut, and the breathing began again, all around us. We didn't sleep that night. We kept the lights off and waited. Trapped the lights off and wait ends, listening to the sound of something large, something wrong, circling the camp like a predator studying its prey. There were no more voices, no more cracked branches, just that horrible, rhythmic breathing. It would grow louder, closer, until it felt like it was just outside the window. Then silence. Then it would start again from the other side. It never touched the vans, never tried to break in. But it didn't need to. It knew we were terrified, and somehow that seemed to be enough for it. When the sun finally broke over the trees, we burst out of our vans like survivors surfacing from a capsized boat. Mark was pale, jittery, his voice hoarse as he muttered, "I've heard elk breathe like that, but this wasn't an elk." Lydia just shook her head. That thing knew us. We didn't even say goodbye to the old man who ran the park. We packed in silence and rolled out, all four of us like escapees from something we couldn't name. We drove until we hit the coast. The ocean had never felt so alive. Vast, clean, indifferent. It didn't care about what we saw. It didn't twist reality. It just was. For 3 days, we stayed at a busy beach campground, surrounded by families and dogs and lifeguard towers. No triangles, no breathing, just the sound of waves. Ellie started smiling again. Lydia got out her drone and began filming shorebirds for a project. Mark even laughed when his tire pressure sensor failed and he had to replace it on gravel. But I couldn't relax, because I still felt it. The feeling like something was waiting for me to let my guard down. Like something had followed us, not in form, but in memory. In the crack between who I was and who I had become since Shadow Pines. And then something happened that broke everything again. It was 4:18 in the morning. I was awake. Hadn't really been asleep. Something had tugged me out of the fog, a sensation, not a sound, a pressure, like a rope slowly tightening around my chest. I opened the side window. The beach was empty. The moon hung above the water like a cracked porcelain plate, pale and heavy. The tide was low, and I could hear the waves dragging over the sand like slow breathing. Then I noticed something by the edge of the water, a figure, standing motionless, facing the ocean, tall, thin. It didn't move. Not even when the wind picked up and sand blew across its legs. It didn't sway. It just stood there, watching. I closed the window quietly, turned back to Ellie, still asleep, peaceful for once, and pressed my back against the wall of the van like it could protect me from whatever that was. When I looked again, it was gone. Not walked away. Not faded. Gone. I never told her about that night. I didn't want to take that piece away from her. But I started noticing little things again. Marks in the sand that didn't match any prints. The sound of something small tapping the van's undercarriage at night. A pine cone. Perfectly clean, no sap. Placed on the windshield one morning, even though there weren't any pine trees for miles. It was happening again. Or maybe it had never stopped. We parted ways with Mark and Lydia a week later, promising to meet up again in Oregon. But we both knew we wouldn't. There was something unspoken between us, a kind of trauma bond that only works when you're facing the same direction. Once you turn away from the darkness, the connection fades into the silence of polite texts and delayed replies. Ellie and I drove east. We told ourselves we were heading toward family, toward home, but neither of us could define what home meant anymore. We passed through towns that felt unfamiliar, campgrounds that made our skin crawl, and forests that seemed to breathe with us. And every time I thought I saw that Sprinter van in a rearview mirror, it would disappear as soon as I looked straight at it. In Flagstaff, we met an old man who sold hand-carved walking sticks out of the back of a pickup. He looked at our VW, nodded, and said, "Be careful out there. These roads weren't built just for travel." I asked him what he meant. He tapped his temple and replied, "Some places they're traps wearing the skin of land. They wait for your mind to crack just wide enough to slip through." I bought a stick I didn't need. I haven't let go of it since. We ended up back near the place where it started. Not Shadow Pines, we'd never go there again, but somewhere close. Another pine-choked corner of the Southwest, where the air thinned and the sky felt heavier than it should. We didn't mean to camp there. We were just looking for a place to rest for the night. But when we pulled in, I felt it immediately. That pressure, that stillness. The gravel lot was empty. No other vans, no other signs of life. But in the middle of the campsite, someone had drawn a triangle in the dirt. 3 circles at the corners, like a warning or an invitation. I looked at Ellie. She looked at me, and we both nodded. Not because we were ready, but because we were tired of running. We left the engine running. Ellie stood by the van, her boots grinding softly into the gravel. I took the walking stick, the one from the man in Flagstaff, and stepped out first. The air had that charged, static quality, like just before a lightning strike. Except there were no clouds, no wind, just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your ears until your own heartbeat sounds foreign. We didn't speak. The triangle in the dirt was so precise it looked carved by machinery, or something that thought in geometry. The lines were shallow, but fresh, still loose at the edges like someone or something had drawn it within the hour. My foot hovered above one of the circles. I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed not to move forward. But that's when I realized we weren't supposed to step into it. That was never the point. The triangle wasn't a trap. It was a signal, a boundary, a line drawn by something ancient, or maybe by someone like us, someone who had survived it, someone trying to warn whoever came next. I turned to Ellie. "Not here," I whispered. "Let's go." She didn't argue. We backed out of that site like we were defusing a bomb. Slow, controlled. My eyes never left the tree line, and for the first time in weeks, nothing followed us. No breathing, no tapping, just the creak of the van's old suspension, the hum of the engine, and the slow return of the sound of wind through trees. That night, we parked in a grocery store lot an hour away. It wasn't scenic, wasn't peaceful. The lights were too bright and the asphalt reeked of oil, but I slept better than I had in months. We started retracing our route after that. Went back through Colorado, skipped Utah, stayed near cities, stayed near people. And slowly, the tension began to ease. It was like whatever had attached itself to us had loosened its grip, like it had grown tired, or maybe we'd moved far enough beyond its reach. But that's not the end of the story, because nothing ever really ends when you've seen something like that. There's a scar it leaves, not on the body, on the way you see the world. I started to notice things others didn't. Campgrounds with no birds, vans with no plates, people who never seemed to blink. And every now and then, when I was driving alone to pick up supplies, I'd catch a glimpse of that sprinter in my rearview mirror. Never close, never following directly, but always there, like a memory refusing to fade. I told myself it was trauma, that it was just my brain working overtime. But deep down, I knew better. A few months later, we were camped in northern Idaho, near a lake, crowded, nothing unusual. Kids were playing with glow sticks. Parents grilled burgers. It was the kind of place we used to only camp at. Safe, predictable. That night, as the laughter faded and people retreated to their RVs, I wandered down to the lake with my flashlight. The moon reflected off the water in broken silver ripples, and there, etched faintly into the wet sand, another triangle, 3 circles. It wasn't fresh, the edges were fading, but it was there. Not a threat, a message. I crouched down, ran my fingers through the groove, and for the first time since Shadow Pines, I smiled. Not because I wasn't afraid anymore, but because I understood. We're not the only ones who've seen it. There are others who escaped, others who carry the same memories, the same quiet dread. We don't talk about it much, not out loud, but if you look closely, you'll start to notice. The way someone glances over their shoulder a little too often, the extra locks on their van doors, the silence that hangs between travelers late at night. It's not paranoia, it's history, it's survival. So here's what they don't tell you in the guidebooks. Here's what no one puts on the glossy campground brochures or the van life travel blogs. Out there, beyond the well-lit pull-throughs and Instagram reels, there are places that don't just feel off. They are off. Places that weren't meant to be found. Places that twist the rules of time, of place, of sense. Sometimes you stumble into them by accident. Sometimes they call to you through detours and dreams and quiet little roads that don't show up on GPS. And sometimes you make it out. But you never leave whole. You come back quieter, more watchful. You learn to trust your gut, even when it makes no sense. You learn that when the birds stop singing, you leave. You don't knock on dark van doors. You don't follow strange lights. You don't cross into triangles drawn in the dirt. And when someone tells you they heard breathing in the woods when nothing was there, you believe them, because you've heard it too. I won't tell you to stop camping. This isn't one of those stories. The road still calls to us. The van still hums beneath my hands like a familiar song. There's peace in this life, joy, freedom, beauty you can't find anywhere else. But you have to be smart. You have to be aware. Because the real horror isn't ghosts or monsters or shadows in the trees. It's the quiet places that change you, the ones that wait, the ones that watch, the ones that remember. So the next time you pull into an empty site that feels a little too still, when the wind stops and the birds go silent and your gut tells you to keep driving, listen. Because some campsites aren't abandoned. They're bait. I didn't grow up camping. My parents were the resort and room service type, allergic to dirt and silence, preferring concrete towers over pine trees. So when I bought my old Volkswagen Westfalia at 31, packed my life into it, and headed west toward the campgrounds of America, I thought I was running toward freedom. It didn't feel like a midlife crisis. It felt like a cleansing, like finally doing something right. But no one warns you that freedom sometimes looks like isolation. No one tells you how fast awe turns to fear when you're alone in the dark with nothing but a lantern and your own thoughts. They don't tell you the places we call public lands hold stories that don't make it onto maps. I started collecting those stories the same way someone might collect rocks or feathers. At first, they were just things I heard, whispers from neighboring campers, uneasy glances when I asked the wrong questions. But then, those stories started finding me. And once they did, the roads I chose stopped feeling random. It was as if something out there wanted to show me something. Wanted me to know that some campgrounds are more than just forgotten corners of wilderness. They're places where reality thins and something else pushes through. The first story I'll tell you, it's my own. I was 32. I'd been on the road a full year. I had stopped checking my phone every hour. I'd learned how to patch a roof leak with Gorilla Tape and how to talk to strangers without flinching. But nothing had prepared me for what happened in the Allegheny National Forest in northern Pennsylvania. It was late September, one of those in-between weeks where summer hangs on during the day, but at night the cold starts to crawl in like a warning. I'd pulled into a small, unmarked clearing down a dirt road that jutted off Route 66, not far from Kane. I'd found it on an old forum thread buried under someone's post about abandoned fire towers. The GPS didn't register it as anything but state land, which was fine by me. No one around for miles, just trees, a creek, and the kind of silence that presses against your ears. At first, it was peaceful. I parked beneath a stand of old hemlocks. The van's windows fogged up from my cooking, and I watched the steam curl while stirring a pot of instant chili. A few birds called in the distance, but mostly it was still. Too still, actually. I didn't register it at the time. I just felt my shoulders tighten like my body knew something I didn't. The kind of stillness where even the wind seems like it's holding its breath. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't feel like it. That's what I told myself anyway. Truth was, something about the air didn't sit right, like it didn't belong to me. I crawled into the Westfalia around 9 to death, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and listened to the forest. But the forest didn't talk back. No bugs, no owls, not even a squirrel in the brush. It was like the world outside the van had shut off. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not on the door, on the window, the one by my feet. 3 knocks. Not frantic, not loud, just purposeful. I shot upright, heart slamming in my throat. My hand reached for the pepper spray I kept under the pillow, and I froze. Another knock, same cadence, 3 times. The van's curtains were drawn. I couldn't see out, and more terrifying, I couldn't tell if whoever was out there could see in. I sat there for what felt like years, not breathing, not blinking, just listening. Silence. No footsteps, no retreating noise, no voice. I told myself it was a branch. Maybe a pine cone fell just right. Maybe a raccoon stood up and brushed the glass. My brain stretched for logic like a drowning man reaching for a rope. But here's the thing. I know what raccoons sound like. I've heard them dig through my trash. I've heard branches slap against the roof during windstorms. This wasn't that. This was intent. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion, adrenaline fried. But the next morning, something had changed. The forest wasn't silent anymore. It was angry. The birds were back, but their calls were sharp, frantic. The chipmunks skittered in manic bursts. And when I stepped outside to stretch and shake off the night, I noticed something on the window. Smudges, long, thin smudges, 4 on one side and a thumb on the other, pressed right where the knocks had been. They looked like fingerprints. Greasy, human-sized. But here's the problem. They were on the inside. I left that clearing in under 5 minutes. Didn't pack up right. Left my water jug and half my dishes out. Just gunned the engine and drove, hands shaking so hard I could barely keep it between the trees. I didn't stop until I hit a Shell station 30 miles south, parked in plain view under a floodlight, and didn't sleep again that night. It was the first time I felt truly watched. Not the way you feel in a city like someone might be scoping your valuables. I mean something deeper, older, like the forest itself had eyes. And that knocking? I wasn't the only one who'd heard it. 2 days later, in a KOA just outside Pittsburgh, I met a couple in a faded Airstream who saw the fear still clinging to my face. The woman, Mary, asked if I was okay. I told her everything, half expecting her to laugh. She didn't. She looked at her husband, then told me something that still echoes in my head. That place has stories, she said. Not ghost stories. Not the kind you tell kids. Real stories. About people who camp alone and wake up with things moved. Or find animal bones placed in patterns around their fire pit. Sometimes they hear a woman crying. Sometimes it's a child laughing. But no one ever finds anyone. I asked if she'd ever been there. No, she said. We don't go near Allegheny. Later that night, I searched more deeply than I had before. Dug past travel blogs and tourism pages. Found Reddit threads, old forest ranger forums, conspiracy blogs with blinking ads and terrible grammar. But beneath all that noise, there was a signal. Other people had seen things, heard things, and not just in Allegheny. The more I looked, the more I realized how often it happened. In national forests, in forgotten corners of Bureau of Land Management land, in those free campgrounds people brag about on Instagram. Something lives out there, or many things, and some of them don't want to be known. But what scared me most wasn't what I'd heard. It was that I knew I'd go back. Because once you touch the edge of something bigger than yourself, something old, buried beneath moss and fog and memory, you can't just forget it. You can't unsee it. So I kept driving, not away from it, but toward it. Not consciously at first. I told myself I was just exploring the region, checking out the hidden gems people overlook. But deep down, I was looking for something. Trying to understand what had brushed up against my life that night in Allegheny, and why it hadn't done more than knock. A few weeks later, I found myself in West Virginia, tracing the outline of Monongahela National Forest, following roads that looped through mountains like a coiled rope. The forests there feel older than time, taller, darker, as if they remember every footstep. I parked near Spruce Knob one evening, after a full day of driving switchbacks in the fog. I hadn't planned to stop, but the van was overheating again. Typical. And a tiny Forest Service campground called Gandy Creek looked deserted enough for the night. Only 3 other campers there. One RV tucked far back near the creek, a tent pitched beside an old Subaru, and a woman in a beat-up road trek who looked like she'd been there for weeks, with folding chairs and tarps stretched out like a spiderweb between the trees. It was late October now. The leaves had turned and dropped, carpeting the forest in browns and oranges, muffling every step. The wind had a voice in those woods. It didn't howl. It whispered. Constant, like it was trying to tell you something you'd forgotten. I parked in the most open spot I could find, near the outhouse. A little too close to the sulfur-stained water spigot, but I didn't care. I just wanted to cook dinner and turn in early. As I stepped out of the van, I noticed the woman in the road trek staring at me, just standing there, arms crossed, not even trying to pretend she wasn't watching. I gave a small wave, polite but cautious. She didn't wave back, just turned and walked into the woods behind her rig. No flashlight, no jacket, no hesitation. I should have paid more attention to that. Later that night, around 1 a.m., the wind stopped. Not died down, stopped. Like someone cut the audio feed. I woke up instantly. The sudden stillness was louder than the wind had been. My ears strained for anything, a car door, a twig snap, the creak of branches. Instead, I heard humming, very faint, female, just a few notes on repeat. I thought of the woman from earlier, and against my better judgment, I peeked through the curtain, but the road trek was empty, lights off, no sign of her. I checked the Subaru, no movement. The humming grew louder, but I couldn't place where it came from. It didn't move like a person walking, it just seemed to exist, floating from the trees themselves. I pressed my ear against the glass, trying to localize it, when I heard another sound, low and rhythmic. Crunch, 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 footsteps. In leaves, but not walking in a straight line. They circled the van, slow, deliberate, dragging a little like someone favoring one leg. My breath stopped. I reached for the pepper spray again. Useless comfort at this point, but my fingers needed something to hold. I waited for the knock. It never came. Instead, something brushed the back bumper. Not a bang or a push, just a slight tap, like someone placing a hand on it. Then silence. The humming stopped. The footsteps stopped. But something was still out there. I could feel it the way you feel someone staring at you through a crowd. My body knew, even if my eyes saw nothing. And then, clear as day, a voice. Right outside the driver's side window, "Why'd you stop?" A woman's voice. Familiar, flat. I didn't move. Couldn't. The van suddenly felt too thin, like the metal skin couldn't protect me from whatever was breathing just inches away. I stayed that way until dawn. Eyes wide, limbs stiff, listening for the voice again, but it never came back. When morning finally smeared itself across the treetops, I stepped outside, shaking, exhausted. The woman's van was gone. No tire marks, no footprints. Just an empty patch of dirt where she'd been parked, the grass flattened and damp. I asked the couple in the tent if they'd seen her leave. They said no. Said they hadn't heard a thing all night. That's when it started to sink in. Whatever had visited me that night, it hadn't wanted to hurt me. It wanted me to question reality, to feel what it feels like to be unmoored, to sit with fear without knowing its shape. And most disturbingly of all, to see how much of it I could tolerate before breaking. Because fear doesn't always crash through the window screaming. Sometimes it tiptoes up in the dark, hums to you like an old lullaby, and waits for you to notice. I drove out of Monongahela without looking back. Didn't stop until I hit a Walmart parking lot near Charleston, where fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees and the world felt real again. I didn't camp again for a while. But the stories didn't stop. They came in pieces. A man at a gas station near Crater Lake told me about a light that hovered outside his tent for hours, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. A woman I met in Taos said she saw something crawl on all fours between campsites in the Carson National Forest, something shaped like a man but moving wrong, its joints bending the wrong way. And the most chilling part? They all said the same thing. They didn't feel like they were being haunted. They felt like they were being studied. I started writing things down after that, not just because I wanted to remember, but because I was beginning to doubt my own memories. Strange details faded too fast. Entire days on the road blurred together, even when I swore I just lived them. Some campsites left no trace on my mind at all. Just a vague sense of fog, like waking from a heavy dream with nothing but dread in your chest. I started to notice patterns, places where cell signal dropped sharply, even when maps said it shouldn't. Roads that didn't match my GPS. Loops that led back to the same bend, the same leaning pine tree, again and again. Old campgrounds with rusted signs and no listings online. Fellow campers who never got out of their vehicles, who just sat behind tinted windows all night, watching or waiting. And then, just north of Flagstaff, I found the journal. I'd parked for the night in an abandoned KOA off Route 66, half buried under years of neglect, its faded sign overtaken by desert brush. It wasn't on any apps, but I'd seen it out of the corner of my eye, set back from the road behind a thicket of dying junipers. My gut told me not to turn in, but I did. I always do. The place was a graveyard of fiberglass, old trailers left to rot, broken chairs, rusted grills, the kind of debris that suggested people left fast without packing. There was an eerie silence that wrapped around everything, the kind of silence that isn't just quiet, but missing. Like the air itself had forgotten how to carry sound. I found the notebook wedged under the broken step of the old campground office. A battered, water-warped thing, full of shaky handwriting and frantic crossings out. No names, no dates, just entries like, "The woods aren't empty, they're hiding something bigger than us." He walked into my dream and asked for the keys. I gave them to him. I don't remember why. If you hear your own voice outside the van, don't open the door. They only knock when they're not ready to be seen. It was that last line that nearly made me vomit. Because that's exactly what had happened back in Allegheny. That first knock, it hadn't been a threat. It had been a warning. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I just remember waking up with the journal on my chest, the van door locked, and the faint smell of smoke in the air. I left before sunrise. And for the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself I was just burned out, sleep deprived. Maybe even losing it. But then came Arizona's high desert, and the place I still can't talk about without feeling it watching me again. Somewhere near Petrified Forest National Park, east of the tourist areas, far from the scenic overlooks, I pulled off on a gravel spur road that hadn't seen traffic in years. I was drawn to it without knowing why. It's like my hands turned the wheel before I decided to. I told myself I'd just camp there one night, that I'd be out by morning. I wasn't, because the road didn't let me. It should have been a simple drive in and out, but every time I tried to retrace the route back to the main highway, it didn't match. The trees looked wrong, the shadows shifted. I'd pass an abandoned cattle gate 3 times, even though I'd driven straight each time. There were no side roads, no forks, no intersections. And then, on the second night, I saw them. People. At first, I thought it was a hiking group, maybe some weird off-grid club. They moved in clusters, not speaking, all wearing similar gray or tan clothing. Neutral, like dust. But they didn't walk like hikers. They moved like sleepwalkers. Smooth, silent, every step synchronized. And every time I looked away and looked back, they were closer. I tried to start the van. The engine sputtered, then died. Dead battery, no warning, no lights left on, no explanation. I locked the doors and waited. They surrounded the van, not attacking, not even touching it, just staring in through the windows, expressionless, still, until one of them, a tall man with sunburned skin and clouded eyes, bent down and placed something gently on the hood. A key. A single old-fashioned brass key like the kind you'd use in a farmhouse from the 1800s. Then they all walked away without a sound. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, the battery worked again. I turned the key, my own key, and the van started like nothing had happened. But the brass key was still there on the hood. I picked it up against my better judgment. It was ice cold, too cold for the Arizona sun. I kept it anyway, and I wish I hadn't. Because from that moment on, things changed. I started hearing my name, in places where no one else was camped, in different voices, sometimes familiar, sometimes my own. I started waking up with the van's sliding door unlocked, even though I always checked it twice. And worst of all, I started dreaming of places I hadn't been yet. Specific trees, broken fences, a rusted swing set deep in a pine forest, and then, weeks later, I'd find them, exactly as I dreamed them. The first time it happened, I pulled over and screamed into the steering wheel until my voice cracked, because there's a special kind of terror that comes knowing you are no longer fully in control of where you go, that something is guiding you, through dreams, through roads, through fear itself. And I don't know if it's trying to protect me, or lead me somewhere I won't come back from. I tried to fight it, started sticking to KOAs again, places with kids riding scooters and boomers and lawn chairs, places with floodlights and trash pickup and office clerks who gave you a receipt and a campground map with the too many rules printed on it. The safety of structure. But even there, I wasn't safe from the dreams. One night at a KOA near Durango, I woke up with my hands pressed against the inside of the windshield. I hadn't climbed up there. I sleep in the back, behind blackout curtains. But somehow, I had crawled forward in the dark, past the cooler, past the stove, and pressed my face to the glass like I was waiting for something to appear on the gravel drive outside. My breath had fogged a circle on the glass, and in that circle inside the condensation was the faintest impression of a handprint. From the outside. No one else had camped near me that night, and that's when I realized whatever this was, whatever had been trailing me since Allegheny, it wasn't confined to the wild places anymore. It could find me anywhere. It could follow me into towns, into crowds, into brightly lit campsites with pool access and propane refills. So I stopped hiding from it. If I was being pulled towards something, I'd find it before it found me. That decision led me west again, through Colorado, across the Navajo Nation, up into Utah's Red Canyons, where the land feels like it remembers things humans were never meant to know. I camped near Goblin Valley, just outside the park boundary. BLM land. No lights, no signs, no other campers, just a stretch of soft sand and rock formations that looked like faces if you stared too long. I set up late in the day. The light was already turning gold when I cut the engine. There was a quiet there heavier than most places. A vacuum. I started hearing it again that night. The voice. It didn't call my name this time. It just said one word over and over. Open. I stayed still. Open. Like it wasn't asking, like it already expected me to obey. And then came the scratching, light, deliberate against the passenger side window. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I turned, heart hammering, and saw nothing, just empty desert. But when I looked back through the windshield, the rearview mirror had moved, tilted up, pointed at my face. That's when I understood. Whatever this was, it was inside the van. I launched forward, fumbling for the dome light, slamming my hand against the plastic until it flickered on. Nothing. No one there. But the moment the light hit, the air inside the van shifted. Not cooler, not warmer. Just denser. Like I'd stepped into a sealed room where someone had just been breathing hard. I didn't sleep. I sat up, clutching the key. The old brass key the sleepwalkers had left for me weeks earlier. And I don't know why I did it, but just before dawn, I stepped outside. The desert was silver in the early light. Windless. Absolutely still. I walked 30 feet from the van, key in my hand, and waited. And I swear to you, something waited with me. I felt it behind me. Not a presence, not a figure, just pressure, like the world was holding its breath. Then, very slowly, very gently, something touched my back. Not a push, not a strike, just the pads of fingers. Cold, dry, deliberate. I turned around. Nothing. Not a print in the sand, not a shadow. But my shirt was warm where it had touched me. And that was the moment I realized this thing, whatever had been following me, testing me, humming and knocking and whispering, it had finally made contact. And it hadn't needed a door. It was never trying to get in. It had been inside me all along. It was my fear, my memory, my unraveling. That night cracked something in me. And when I finally got back into the van and turned the key, the dashboard radio, long dead, long broken, lit up for the first time in months. But it didn't play music. It played my own voice. My voice, whispering something I never remembered recording. I'm still here. I'm still watching. I ripped the power cord out of the stereo. It kept playing. I pulled the fuse. It kept playing. And then silence. It hasn't spoken since, but I know it's not gone. Because sometimes when I'm driving down some back road where the trees lean a little too close, I catch movement in the corner of my eye. Not figures, not creatures, mirrors. Mirrors in the woods, hanging from branches, embedded in tree trunks, shards stuck in fence posts like teeth. And sometimes, only sometimes, I see myself in them. But my reflection isn't moving the same way I am. It lags, or stares back when I'm looking away, or smiles when I'm not. And now, even in daylight, I keep hearing that word again. Open. Not like an order anymore, but like an invitation. I haven't told anyone this. Not because I'm afraid they won't believe me, but because I'm terrified they will. Because once you hear this story, once you really hear it, it stays with you. Not like a ghost story. Not like campfire folklore, but like something old and patient that's been waiting for you to notice it. And once you do, it doesn't let go. It's been nearly 2 years since that first knock in Allegheny. And I've camped in over 40 states now, some of the most beautiful, breathtaking places in America. Big Sur Glacier, the Tetons. I've stood under the northern lights in Montana. I've fallen asleep to coyotes singing through the scrub of West Texas. But it doesn't matter where I go anymore. Every place has a crack in it, and it's through that crack that something else watches. The rules are shifting. What used to feel like coincidence now feels like choreography, like I'm being moved, herded, by something that knows the shape of my fear better than I do. Take what happened in Oregon. I'd been avoiding the coast for months. Something about the endless gray, the mist that never quite settles, the way the ocean sounds more alive out there. I finally gave in and camped outside Florence on a mossy bluff not far from the dunes. I got there just before a storm, not a thunderstorm, not lightning and rain, just wind, endless, whispering wind. It didn't howl, it spoke. You ever been in a place where the trees don't just creak, they warn you? That night, the van rocked side to side, but the trees outside didn't sway. The wind was inside the vehicle. I could hear it in the cabinets, in the vents, in the seams of the window seals. And somewhere inside that wind, buried under layers of white noise, I heard something else. A rhythm, knocking, not on the door, not even on the van itself, but from inside the walls, as if the van wasn't mine anymore, as if it had become a shell for something else to crawl inside. I grabbed the old key again. It was hot this time, scalding. I dropped it onto the floor and it hissed when it touched the vinyl. I opened the side door and let the wind rip through me. My hair, my shirt, the maps taped to the ceiling, they all lifted, and for a second it felt like gravity loosened. And there, out past the tree line, barely visible in the fog, was a mirror, standing upright, in the middle of a clearing that hadn't been there before. I should have stayed in the van, but I didn't. I walked to it barefoot without thinking. The ground was soft and wet. The trees around the mirror seemed to lean back, as if making room for something sacred or cursed, and when I looked into the glass, I didn't see myself. I saw the van, from above, like a drone shot, still, waiting, with the door wide open. I turned around fast, but there was no mirror behind me anymore. Just trees, just silence, just my own breath shaking in my chest like a broken metronome. I ran back to the van, slammed the door, threw the key out the window into the woods. And for the first time in this whole journey, I begged whatever it was to leave me alone. Not with words, with tears, with silence, with surrender. But silence, I've learned, is just permission. That night, I dreamed I was back in Allegheny. Not the same campground, not exactly, but it was the same feeling. The same fog, the same soundless dark. And there, across the fire pit, sat myself. Same flannel shirt, same eyes, same tired expression. He didn't speak. He just pointed behind me. I didn't want to turn, but I did. And what I saw wasn't a creature, wasn't a ghost, wasn't a monster. It was a door. Standing alone, in the middle of the woods. Old wood, rusted handle, slightly cracked open, just enough to see nothing on the other side. Just black. Deep, still black. I woke up gasping for air, lungs full of smoke, but there was no fire, only the smell of burnt pine needles. And the faintest outline of a handprint, pressed into the condensation on the inside of the van's window. The same size as mine. That was 4 weeks ago. Since then, I haven't seen anyone. No hikers, no campers, not even park rangers. Even the towns I pass through feel empty. Like the people are just shadows holding shape until I drive away. I'm not sure if I'm still on the same road anymore. Not physically, not spiritually, not mentally. Something changed that night in Oregon. That mirror didn't just show me something, it took something. And now I think I know what this all is, what this thing is. It's not a ghost, it's not a demon, it's not a creature from the woods, it's a memory so old, so ancient that it doesn't belong to a person but to the land itself, to the road, to the space between campsites where the light doesn't reach. And now I'm part of it. Now it remembers me. I've stopped using GPS, not by choice really. It just stopped working. Every time I open the map, it spins. No matter where I drive, the little blue arrow drifts slow and useless, as if I've slipped somewhere beyond its reach. Even the compass on my dash has started to betray me. It twitches, rattles, then points toward nowhere. Places where there's no road, no trail, no anything. At first, I thought it was just a mechanical issue. Old van, after all. But then I realized something unsettling. The van itself still runs fine. No sputtering, no electrical issues, no dead battery, no mechanical failure. It's only the guidance systems that fail, as if whatever's out here with me doesn't want me to know where I'm going. Because I'm not lost, I'm being guided. Every strange detour I've taken has led to the same kind of place. Silent, remote, forgotten by time. Places with no bird song, places where even the moss feels dry, where fire doesn't crackle, it fizzles like it's afraid to draw attention. I pull into these places not because I choose to, but because I feel compelled to. Like something in me is saying, this is the place, this is the next door. The last one was in northern Arizona. High elevation, ponderosa pine country. I'd followed a narrow dirt road for hours, past old mining ruins and abandoned homesteads with half-collapsed roofs. There were no tire tracks, no recent signs of life. Just one narrow path lined with yellow grass and brittle shrubs, the kind that snap like bones when you step on them. And at the end of the road, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, was a clearing. Perfectly round. Flat. Silent. Too perfect. I cut the engine, got out, didn't hear a single thing. Not a breeze, not a cricket, not even the sound of cooling metal from the van's engine. The whole world was listening. And then without any warning, I felt it again. That pressure behind me. No footsteps, no breath, just presence. I turned around. There was a man standing at the edge of the trees, not moving, not threatening, just watching. He wore a parka, stained at the hem, tan pants, and he had no shoes. His feet were black with dust. But his eyes, they weren't blank. They were too focused for that. Too awake. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. He raised his hands slowly, not a wave, just a lift, palm facing me, and then he pointed to the dirt behind me. I turned again, and there it was, another door. This one was smaller, half buried, the top of the frame barely sticking up from the packed soil like something once underground had started to claw its way out. I didn't touch it, not yet. I walked around it, circled it. But every angle looked the same, just that warped old wood and a rusted handle, smeared with something too dark to be dirt. The man was gone when I turned back. No trail, no sound, no breath in the trees. Just absence. I went back to the van and sat for a long time, staring at that half-buried door through the windshield, and I asked myself the question I've been avoiding since this whole thing began. What if the reason this thing keeps finding me is because I never closed the first door? Back in Allegheny, when I heard the knocking, when I let that sleepwalker reach the van, when I took the key, when I followed the whispers, I never turned it away. Not really. I opened something, and I've been driving through its halls ever since. These forests, these bluffs, these dry canyons, they aren't random. They're rooms, corridors, and something much larger than we understand. Some people live their whole lives on the main floor, under the lights, with maps and signs and trails that loop back to themselves. But some of us take a wrong turn, and the moment you do, the floor creaks. Something hears, and the house shifts. That's what this journey has become. Not a vacation, not freedom, not the open road, but a descent. And that night, staring at that half-buried door, I finally understood there's only one way out. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even pretend to. I just sat in the driver's seat with my hands wrapped around the steering wheel like a lifeline, staring at that door. I couldn't feel my fingers. Not from cold, from something deeper, like I was fading. Like the world around me was drawing breath and I was the exhale. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I made the choice. Not with courage, not with clarity, just resignation. I stepped outside, barefoot, like the man I saw. Maybe I thought if it everything like he did, I'd understand, or maybe I'd be spared. The dirt was cold, the world was gray, and that door, that cursed, ancient-looking thing, looked smaller now. Not physically, but emotionally. It didn't loom, it waited. I dropped to my knees and brushed the dust from its edge. No symbols, no runes, no marks, just old, damp wood and a handle that looked more like bone than metal. I reached for it and stopped, not from fear, but from certainty, because I realized in that moment that the door wouldn't open outward, it would open inward, into me. Because this wasn't about a haunting, it was about a homecoming, a return to something my soul had been circling for years, pretending it was just wanderlust, just exploration, just a road trip. But deep down, I'd always known I wasn't running away, I was trying to remember, and this door was memory incarnate. So I gripped the handle and pulled. It didn't creak, it didn't groan, it didn't scream, it just opened. And what I saw, I don't have words for it, not because it was beyond description, but because it was familiar. It was a hallway, my hallway, from a childhood house that burned down when I was 12, but older, darker, more worn. The paint was peeling, the carpet soaked with black water, the smell of scorched insulation, mold, and something feral pulsed from inside. And at the end of the hallway, there was another version of me, sitting on the floor, holding something in his lap. I stepped through, one foot, then the other. And as soon as both soles touched that rotted carpet, I heard it again. From behind me. The door had closed. I turned to face it, but there was no handle on this side. Only scratches, deep, desperate scratches, as if someone or something had been trying to get out. The other me stood up. He looked tired, wild, his eyes sunken but burning. He held something out. It was the key, that same black bent key from Allegheny, but it was wet now, dripping. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand moved anyway, and the moment I grabbed it, I remembered everything, every door I'd passed through, every forest that turned into a maze, every whisper I dismissed. It wasn't the land that was haunted, it was me. I was carrying this thing, feeding it, with every moment I tried to forget, with every town I didn't return to, with every friend I stopped calling. It wasn't chasing me, it was with me, always had been. And now, It wanted all of me. But here's the thing. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I breathed. For the first time in months, I took a full, unbroken breath. And in that moment of stillness, I spoke, not with fear, not with rage, but with truth. You don't own me. The hallway flickered, the walls twisted, the floor hissed, but I stood still. And then light, a tiny sliver of it coming from under the door, not the one I came through, but a new one, just ahead. Small, simple, wooden. I walked to it, put the key in, turned, and stepped through. The van was there, back in the clearing. The sun had risen, the air smelled like pine again, the birds were singing, everything looked the same, but it wasn't, because I wasn't. I climbed back in, started the engine, and began to drive, not away, but forward. And as I pulled out of the woods, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The clearing was gone. No door, no circle, no sign I'd ever been there. Only the road, winding and broken and endless, but mine. You want to know what I learned from all this? The scariest things in life aren't monsters in the woods. They're not what knocks on your van at midnight. They're not even the shadows that follow you. The scariest things are the truths you bury so deep that they start to grow roots. The traumas you ignore, the pain you run from, the parts of yourself you're too afraid to name. But here's the thing, if you face them, if you step through that door, no matter how dark or buried or broken it is, you come back stronger. You come back whole, you come back awake. And when you do, no campground, no forest, no whisper in the night can break you, because you've been to the heart of it. And you survived. So drive on, friend. Drive toward the cracks. And when the knocking comes again, don't run. Listen, because sometimes nightmares aren't there to haunt you. They're there to wake you up. I should have turned back when the snow swallowed the road. It wasn't just a light dusting or a passing flurry. No, this was a curtain, thick, white, endless, falling so fast it blurred the pines and erased the trail behind my tires. But I kept driving. Part stubbornness, part shame. I'd promised myself this trip would mean something. I wasn't going to flinch just because the forest decided to test me. It was the second week of January, and I was somewhere along County Road 480, south of Marquette, Michigan. Upper Peninsula country. Deep woods, quiet lakes, cold as a ghost's breath. And I was alone. Just me, my 97 Volkswagen Eurovan, and a plan to camp off-grid for 3 nights along Lake Michigan. I'd read about an unmarked trail a few miles north of Craig Lake State Park that supposedly led to an old logging clearing. Perfect for solitude, maybe even some reflection. That's what I told myself. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't out here for peace. I was running. From people. From expectations. From the version of myself that smiled too often when he wanted to scream. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. Just vague gestures to a few friends. Somewhere remote, Michigan woods, off-grid for a while. I even shut off location tracking. I needed to disappear, if only for a few days. So when the snow started, I didn't think much of it. It's the up, after all. Weather changes by the hour. I had chains on my tires and a heater system I'd tested back in December. The van had been good to me over the years. Tough, dependable. I trusted it more than I trusted most people. Around 3 p.m., I found the turnoff, a rutted 2-track disappearing into thick trees. My stomach twisted as the tires dipped off the main road and onto the icy path. That kind of gut tightening that doesn't scream danger yet, just whispers. Are you sure? The trail was narrow. Trees so close they brushed the mirrors. I kept one hand tight on the wheel and the other on the heater knob. The van groaned, but it moved steady, slow, until the trees thinned out and revealed a flat clearing ringed by dark conifers, the snow untouched. That's where I parked, right in the center, surrounded by silence. I turned off the engine and the world went still. No wind, no birds, no distant hum of traffic, just snow falling like ash and the creak of old trees groaning under its weight. I stepped out, boots crunching into powder, breath fogging in front of me. I could feel the cold settling into my bones, crawling up through my sleeves, needling behind my ears. The air was sharp, bitter. But that wasn't the part that made me uneasy. It was the smell, or lack of it. No pine, no wood, no scent at all, like the forest was holding its breath. Still, I busied myself, set up the inside of the van for the night, cracked open a can of soup, lit a small propane heater, read a few pages from a beat-up novel, tried to act normal, but my ears were tuned for something else. Every groan of the trees, every shift in the snowpack outside made me glance up. By 8 p.m., it was pitch black. Not just dark, blinding. I turned on the interior lights and zipped into my sleeping bag fully clothed. Told myself the unease was just the isolation. The silence. I was halfway to sleep when I heard it. Not loud, not close, just a knock. 3 of them. Faint. Hollow. I sat up, heart thudding, listening. Nothing. I convinced myself it had to be snow dropping from the trees. Maybe a limb shifting under the weight. Trees make sounds in the cold, I reminded myself. It's normal. I slept in fits. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up again to that damn knocking. Always 3 taps. Always spaced apart like something patient was calling. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Just nerves. The isolation playing games with my senses. I opened the van door and stepped outside. There were no prints in the snow. Nothing disturbed the soft white sheet that blanketed the clearing. No deer, no squirrels, no signs of life at all. Except something was missing. I couldn't place it at first, just a subtle sense of absence, like walking into a room you know intimately and sensing that one small thing has been moved. Then it hit me. The trees were too quiet. There were no broken limbs, no fallen branches, no signs of a disturbance that would have caused those sounds. Everything looked pristine, and yet I still felt watched. That day I kept busy, hiking a short loop around the clearing to stretch my legs and make sure I could still find my way back to the trailhead. I marked trees with red tape, every 20 feet or so, even though the snow was deep enough to swallow the trail completely if another storm rolled in. It was during that walk that I felt it for the first time, the cold shift. Not colder in temperature, that I could handle. This was something else. A drop in emotional warmth. The woods, once just indifferent, now felt attentive, like the trees had turned their faces inward, like the cold had found a purpose. And then there was the smell. Rot. Just a faint trace, drifting in the wind, like meat left too long in a freezer burn. Faint enough to question, strong enough to follow. I found nothing. Back at camp, I made a fire with the few dry sticks I'd collected. It barely crackled in the wet air. The flames seemed smaller than they should have been. Duller. I chalked it up to damp kindling. That night, the knocking came back, this time closer. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I lay in my sleeping bag, hand on my hatchet, breath shallow. Then I heard footsteps. Not animal. Crunching snow, slow, measured, as if pacing. I killed the lights in the van and peered through the frosted window. Nothing, but I didn't sleep. And when dawn came, I stepped out into a silence that felt thicker than snow. I found the tracks. Human. Barefoot. Wide. Long stride. They circled the van. Twice. Then vanished toward the edge of the woods. No prints leading in, just leading out. Like whatever made them appeared from nowhere and left without turning back. I didn't pack up that morning, not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me had started to unravel. I wish I could say it was logic that kept me there, that I was being rational. But it wasn't. It was pride. Pride and denial. I kept looking at those tracks, circling the van, disappearing into nothing, and trying to make them fit into some story I could understand. Maybe someone was out here hiking barefoot. Maybe it was a prank or hallucination. I hadn't really slept. My mind could have imagined it. I told myself all of that, but deep down, I knew better. The tracks weren't just barefoot, they were wrong. Too long, toes too splayed, the weight too heavy for a human foot. I stood over them and my stomach knotted like a rope being twisted tight. The edges hadn't even started to melt or soften in the sun, like they'd been made minutes ago. And yet I'd been awake the whole time. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to turn that key, spin the van around, and get back to the road. But the trail was already disappearing. Overnight, another 6 inches had fallen, and now the trees all looked the same. My markers were buried. My tracks gone. Still, I tried. I walked the perimeter again, this time pushing farther than I had the day before, pacing the edge of the tree line and calling out, "Hello?" like some idiot in a horror film. Half hoping no one would answer, half terrified someone would. No response. Only the trees creaking like they were warning each other in a language I wasn't meant to understand. I kept walking until I stumbled across something I hadn't seen before. An old tree, split at the trunk like lightning had struck it years ago. Except the wood wasn't blackened. It was clean, almost white, stripped of bark like bones bleached in the sun. Around it, nothing grew. No shrubs, no saplings, not even moss. But what stopped me cold wasn't the tree. It was the sound, breathing, low, slow, close, not mine. It came from behind the tree, so faint I could have mistaken it for wind. But it wasn't wind. Wind doesn't hold rhythm. Wind doesn't hold an exhale with restraint. I froze. My breath caught. I stood there for what felt like forever, then slowly backed away, never turning my back, never blinking. By the time I made it back to the van, my hands were shaking. That night, I didn't eat. I sat inside with all the lights off, every curtain drawn, my hatchet and flare gun clutched in my lap. The snow started again around 9 p.m., not just falling, but drifting sideways, pulled by a wind that didn't howl so much as it whispered. I could hear it now. The forest wasn't just silent, it was listening, and then came the knocks. 3, closer. Pause, 3 more. Right against the van's rear panel, I didn't move. Then the scratching started, long drags of something sharp against the driver's side window, slow, measured, taunting. I squeezed the hatchet, my knuckles were white. Then it spoke. A voice, not human, not quite animal. Something caught between them, raspy like dry leaves across broken glass. It said my name, not a shout, a whisper, right outside the door. Daniel. I stopped breathing. My name isn't listed anywhere on the van. There's no license plate vanity, no stickers, nothing. Even the emergency ID inside the glove box is buried under a notebook. It said it again. Daniel? That's when I lost it. I grabbed the flare gun, threw the door open, and fired into the trees. Red light arced across the snow, a brief flash that painted the forest blood red. Nothing. No tracks. No shapes. Just snow falling harder now. And silence, stretching again like elastic skin over a deep wound. I didn't sleep. Just sat there, watching the window, waiting for daylight. But daylight never came. Not really. When morning did arrive, the sky stayed gray, low clouds pressing down on the forest like a lid. The kind of sky that doesn't let light through, just leaches the color from everything below. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Dead. Battery? Freezing? Or something worse? I checked the engine compartment. All looked fine. No signs of damage, but the battery had drained completely. Like something had drawn every ounce of power while I slept. I was trapped. And I knew now, with a sick certainty, that whatever was out there didn't want me to leave. So I waited. I ate a few mouthfuls of trail mix, drank some melted snow. I kept a journal, wrote notes to myself, time-stamped every sound I heard. I thought if I could just make it until morning again, the sun might break through. Maybe someone would come down the trail. Maybe the weather would shift. But the forest didn't work that way. Not this part. Not anymore. By the third night, things began to unravel completely. That's when I saw it. Not a glimpse, not a shadow, a full view. It stood at the edge of the tree line just past where the firelight used to reach. Tall, gaunt, skin the color of frostbitten flesh. Antlers, massive and branching like the roots of a dead tree, rose from its skull. Its limbs were long, almost insect-like, with too many joints, and it moved with a jerked, unnatural rhythm. Not quite walking, more like gliding and stuttering forward as though time bent around its motion. But it was the eyes that undid me, not glowing, not red, just empty, deep sockets, hollow and hungry, like they were always looking inward. It didn't charge, it didn't growl, it just stood there, watching. I could feel it probing, not physically, mentally, emotionally. It fed on fear. That much was clear. The more I trembled, the more it stirred. I stayed inside, didn't move, didn't blink. I started talking to myself, out loud, reciting names of old friends, places I loved, songs from when I was a kid. I did it to drown out the part of my mind that was unraveling, the part that was whispering, let it in, let it speak, let it take you. And still it stood there, waiting. I don't know how long it stayed there. An hour? 3? Time didn't work the same anymore. The days were just different shades of dusk, and the nights stretched into things that felt endless. I lost track. My only measure was the ticking of my own heartbeat, and even that felt wrong, like it sped up when nothing happened and slowed down when the air turned cold for no reason. At some point, I must have passed out, not from sleep, from sheer emotional exhaustion. And when I opened my eyes again, the creature was gone. But the silence wasn't, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's heavy, a silence that holds the shape of something missing, like whatever had stood there had left a hole in the air behind it. I got out of the van. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe it was desperation, maybe stupidity, or maybe something in me cracked and the part that cared about survival had gone offline. Either way, I stepped into the snow in just my boots and jacket, flare gun at my side, and started walking. No path, no compass, just a direction, away. I trudged past trees that all looked the same, past the bleached one I'd found before, only now there were 3 just like it, all stripped, all hollowed. A pattern. I passed an old sign half buried in snow. The metal was rusted, illegible. I scraped away the frost, 2 words faintly etched. Old Reserve. It wasn't on any map I'd checked, but something about it rang a bell. A story I'd read online months before, some hushed-up area of the Upper Peninsula, a wildlife reserve decommissioned in the 80s after several disappearances. Hunters who went missing, locals who spoke of the cold walkers. People who claimed to see movement in trees during blizzards, figures that didn't leave prints, that mimicked the voices of loved ones. At the time, I dismissed it. Campfire folklore. But now, walking alone in that same place, I realized they weren't making it up. It was real. I kept walking. Hours passed. I kept thinking I saw cabins between the trees, old roofs, or lights in the distance, but when I got closer, they vanished. Trees again, shadows, snow. I knew the forest was toying with me, shifting like it had a will of its own, like I was inside something alive, and then I heard it again. My name. But this time, it wasn't just one voice, it was 2. One sounded like my sister, the other, my father. They're both alive, hundreds of miles away. But the voices were perfect, the same cadence, the same tone, not echoes, exact replicas. And they were arguing, fighting over me, telling me different things. One begged me to run. The other whispered for me to stay. That's when I saw the cabin. Small, sagging, set back in the trees like it had been dropped there by accident. Smoke curled from a metal pipe chimney, a soft yellow glow in the window. I should have known better, but I was freezing, half delirious, and completely out of options. The snow was falling harder. My legs burned. My fingers were turning blue inside my gloves. So I went in. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open like it had been waiting. Inside, one room, wood stove faintly glowing, table, chair, cot, dust but no cobwebs, not abandoned, lived in, recently. And in the far corner, a journal. I read it, every page. Whoever had written it had been stuck here too. Their name was Miles, I think. A camper like me. Came in late December. Van broke down. Snow blocked the trail. Same footsteps, same voice, same thing. His last entry was smeared. The writing trembled like his hand had been shaking violently. But I could still make out a few lines. It doesn't feed like animals do. It feeds on what we don't admit, the guilt, the secrets, the parts of us we bury. It isn't just hunting me, it's wearing me down. If you find this, don't run, don't listen, don't believe the voice that sounds like the person you love. I sat there for hours, holding that journal like it saved me, like it had answers. And that's when the footsteps came back. Not outside, on the roof. Light at first, then heavier, pacing, slow circles. Then I heard breathing at the window, not panting, not wind, controlled, focused, close. I didn't move. Then the voice came again, but this time it was my own, clear as day. "Daniel," it said, "come out. You can't stay in there forever. You know that." I froze. It didn't shout, it whispered, persuasive, kind, just like the voice in my own head when I'm too tired to fight. Then it said something that made my blood turn to ice. "You've been here before? Don't you remember?" Something shifted then, like a curtain inside me pulled back. I had been here before, not physically, but emotionally. This place, this frozen trap, this no-exit zone, it was a mirror, a manifestation, a memory I'd buried years ago. The night my best friend Caleb died, it was during a snowstorm. We were teenagers. Took his dad's Jeep out on the logging roads, trying to find a place to hike. We lost traction, slid, rolled. I got out. He didn't. I lied to his family, said I didn't see what happened, said I tried to get him out. I didn't. I ran. I never went back. And now, this thing knew. It had dug into me, found the deepest wound I had and peeled it open. That's what it did. That's how it fed. Not on flesh, but on the rot we carry. The pain we suppress. The snow wasn't just cold, it was cleansing. It broke people down, removed distractions, left only the truth. And once you remembered, once you were vulnerable, That's when it struck. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of what might come through the door, but because I was afraid of what I'd remember if I closed my eyes. The Wendigo doesn't knock. It doesn't howl. It doesn't drag its claws across your roof for drama. That's Hollywood nonsense. The real thing, whatever it is, waits for your silence. It waits for the moment you let your guard down, the second you stop lying to yourself. It waits until you feel the guilt boil back up, and then it takes your face, your voice, your thoughts, and turns them against you. I stayed in the cabin all morning, didn't eat, couldn't. The journal lay next to me like a dead animal. Eventually, I noticed something under the cot. A trapdoor, half rotted, hidden under a moth-eaten rug. I pulled it open. Cold air hissed out like a breath held too long. There was a ladder, no light, just a narrow drop into darkness. Maybe some primal part of me wanted to turn away. But I was past that. Fear wasn't keeping me alive anymore. Curiosity was. So I climbed down, 12 steps, each creaking louder than the one before. At the bottom, dirt floor, stone walls, and a small lantern already lit. Lit. Not empty. Something or someone had been here recently. There were scratches on the walls, deep gouges, symbols maybe. I traced one with my fingers. It felt older than the cabin above it, older than English. That's when I saw the bones, a pile of them in the far corner. Small, human, some clean, some still with frozen sinew clinging to them. But worse, one of them had a shoe, a hiking boot, bright blue. The same color as mine. My stomach turned. I hadn't been the first here, but someone like me had. And they died in this exact room, likely thinking the same thought I was now. I should have screamed. I should have run, but my body wouldn't move. And then I heard a whisper, not outside, inside my chest, right beneath my ribs, like a breath that wasn't mine. He didn't die right away. He called for you. I collapsed. It wasn't a voice in my ear. It was a knowing, a message etched into my marrow. That was the Wendigo's real power. It didn't kill you. It dismantled you, cell by cell, memory by memory, until you didn't know which part was you and which part was it. I don't remember how I got back upstairs. I woke up by the wood stove, covered in sweat and dirt, the trapdoor sealed beneath me like it never existed. And that's when I knew I had to go back to the van. I had to leave. Even if it meant freezing to death, even if I got lost and buried beneath 10 feet of snow, it would be better than staying. Because the longer I remained in that cabin, the more it began to feel familiar, safe, comfortable. And that's the last stage, comfort. When the Wendigo isn't scary anymore, when it starts to feel like part of you, you're already gone. I ran. Back through the trees, through knee-deep snow, back toward where I thought the van might be. The trees didn't fight me this time. That was the worst part. They opened, like they wanted me to find it. And I did. Exactly where I left it, untouched. And on the side mirror, a handprint, human-sized, but backwards, like someone had pressed their palm from the inside of the mirror. I didn't stop. I climbed in, turned the ignition, nothing, dead. Of course it was. Battery was probably drained to the bone by now. I pulled out the flare gun, slammed the glove box shut, and started doing the only thing I could, building a fire outside the van. Big, smoky, messy. I needed to be found. If not by rangers, then by someone. As the flames rose, I felt it again. The cold. Not on my skin, in my lungs, in my thoughts, and behind me, footsteps. Only this time I didn't turn around, I didn't give it the satisfaction. I threw the flare gun into the fire and walked straight into the trees. Not running, just walking, because if I was going to die here, I wanted it on my own terms. But then, I heard a shout. Real. Raw human. Hey! A voice from the tree line. Flashlights. 3 of them. Rangers. Real ones. I almost collapsed right there. They rushed me. Blankets, radios, shouting into walkies. I was crying, babbling, probably incoherent. They asked how long I'd been out there. I said 4 days. They looked at each other concerned. You've been missing for 2 weeks. I shook my head. No, 4 days, I swear. I had food left. But the food was gone, eaten through, molded, empty. My body had lost weight. My ribs showed through my shirt. My cheeks were hollow. 2 weeks. Gone. Like a dream that fed on time itself. They got me out by snowmobile. I was airlifted to a hospital in Marquette. Frostbite, dehydration, severe hypothermia. But I lived. Barely. They kept me for observation. Ran blood work. Monitored my sleep. Asked all the right questions with that calm, clinical edge that says they don't believe you, but they'll pretend to, for the sake of the chart. I didn't tell them about the bones, or the voice in my chest, or the backward handprint on the mirror. I just said I got lost in the snow and blacked out in a cabin. That was enough to satisfy them. In fact, they were impressed I'd survived. But one nurse, older, maybe late 60s, she pulled the curtain one night while checking my vitals and whispered something that chilled me deeper than the snow ever had. "You saw it, didn't you?" I blinked. "Saw what?" She didn't answer. She just gently patted my arm and said, "You made it out. Don't go looking for it again." That's the thing, though. I didn't look for it the first time. And it hadn't finished with me. A week after they discharged me, I drove to a motel in Traverse City. I couldn't stand to be inside the van anymore. Not with the way the windows steamed at night from nothing. Not with the faint sound of breathing when the engine was off. I didn't touch the steering wheel without gloves. I didn't look into the mirrors, not for more than a second. Every time I did, I caught something behind my eyes, something still traveling with me, not in the van, in me. And I knew if I didn't face it, it would eat its way through every part of me until I forgot who I was, or worse, remembered something that was never mine. So I did what I never wanted to do. I called my brother. We hadn't spoken in years. After our dad died, things just broke. I couldn't tell you why. It wasn't one fight. It was 100 small silences that became permanent. But he answered, and he didn't hesitate when I asked if I could come over. He lived up in the Upper Peninsula, Ironwood, right near the border, middle of nowhere, but warm, safe, human. When I arrived, he hugged me longer than I expected, and he didn't ask what happened. Not at first, but that night, we sat by his wood stove with a couple of beers, and I told him everything. The snow, the forest, the cabin, the trapdoor, the voice that lived where my lungs should be. And when I finished, he didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He leaned forward and said, "That's what happened to Trevor." Trevor was our cousin. He'd gone missing 5 years ago while hiking solo near Munising. Everyone thought he fell through the ice or got caught in a storm. But there was no body, no sign of gear, just his journal, found weeks later in a hollow tree. They never told me what was in it, until now. My brother stood, pulled a box from the bookshelf and opened it. Inside, photos, letters, and a small mold-stained notebook. He handed it to me. Page 1. If you're reading this, I'm already dead, but something else is wearing my voice. My breath caught. Page after page, it was the same story. Slight differences. His cabin was smaller, his creature more shadow than flesh, but the rhythm was the same. The cold, the memory loss, the whisper that wasn't a sound. Trevor described it like this. It doesn't chase you. It waits, and when you break, when the guilt opens the door, it steps inside and never leaves. He ended the journal with a single line, "Don't follow the tracks, they're not yours." I didn't sleep that night either, but something shifted. For the first time since the forest, I felt like I wasn't alone, like I hadn't imagined the whole thing. There were others, other stories, other survivors, or at least witnesses. And that's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about escaping it. It was about outliving it. The Wendigo, whatever it really is, doesn't live in the woods. It lives in us, in our regret, our guilt, our inability to forgive ourselves for things we couldn't control. That's how it feeds. And once I understood that, the fear changed. It didn't vanish, but it became something I could walk beside. I started researching, quietly, carefully. Stories from old Ojibwe oral histories, journals from early trappers, cryptic ranger reports from the 70s marked with psychological event or isolated delusion. They all describe the same cycle: snow, isolation, hunger, a voice that remembers things you've buried, and always the same ending. Someone walks out of the woods that isn't the same as when they went in. The native word Wendigo isn't just about a monster, it's about imbalance, brokenness, the moment when desperation becomes something inhuman. It's not a creature you hunt. It's a boundary you cross, and it waits for people like me, people who run, people who carry too much shame to speak out loud. But here's the thing the Wendigo didn't count on. I'm still here. I still wake up sweating, still flinch when snow hits the windows, still avoid my own reflection on cloudy days. But I talk now, I tell the story, and that's what it hates. because silence is its favorite food. It's been almost a year since I left those woods. Most days I feel fine. Other days I hear something when I'm alone. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling just under the skin, like frost spreading across a window that isn't there. A weight in my ribs that doesn't belong to me. But I keep moving. I talk to people now. Other van lifers, campers, survivors. Not all of them know they've seen something, but some do. You can tell. There's a quiet in their voice when they describe being stuck in a whiteout or waking up to their own footprints leading away from camp. One guy told me he drove through Hiawatha Forest and saw a girl waving for help at the side of the road. Said she was barefoot, bleeding. He stopped, but when he turned his head, she was suddenly on the other side of the van, smiling with too many teeth. He drove for 10 hours without stopping after that. Another woman, camping near Paradise, said she kept hearing a baby crying from the woods. Her friends thought it was an animal mimic, but she said the cries were coming from the trees, 20 feet up. None of them reported it. Who would believe them? I barely believe myself some days, but I've learned something since then. Something that changed how I see all of this. The Wendigo doesn't need to kill you. That's not the point. It wants you to vanish. Not your body, your name, your memories, your past, the parts of you that made sense, made you real, made you worth finding. It feeds on the pieces you're too afraid to say out loud, the grief you shove into silence, the rage you bury under politeness, and it waits forever, if it has to, until the cold outside matches the cold you've hidden inside, and then it walks in. That's why I'm telling this, not for views, not for clicks or thrill seekers, but because I know someone out there is driving through a snow-covered state right now, chasing a little freedom, trying to outrun the things they don't talk about. Maybe you've been sleeping in your Volkswagen by the edge of a frozen lake. Maybe you've seen something in the fog that looked like a man, or didn't. Maybe the forest is quieter than it should be, like it's listening. And maybe, like me, you're trying to tell yourself it's all in your head. But here's the truth. Not everything in your head is yours. Some of it was planted there, by cold, by hunger, by grief so deep it puts on skin and teeth and speaks with your voice. If you feel that shadow, don't ignore it. Talk, write, shout. Name it. Because the Wendigo doesn't survive on bodies, it survives on secrets. The cabin I found? It wasn't real in the way you think. It was a place built from pain, a shape my mind could accept. It looked like shelter, but it was just a tomb for people who stopped speaking, who let guilt become silence, who mistook cold comfort for safety. That's what I almost did. That's how it almost got me. But I kept the engine warm. I lit the fire. I asked for help, and I forgave myself for needing it. That's what saved me. Not strength, not courage. Connection. So if you're listening to this, maybe you've seen something strange, or maybe you haven't. Maybe the real reason you're still here, still parked on the shoulder of some snowy trailhead, is because something inside you has gone still, like a lake frozen over. I get it. But please, don't let it stay quiet too long. Talk to someone. Write your story. Share it, even if your voice shakes. Because once you do, that thing in the trees, it has to move on. It can't live in the light. I don't camp in winter anymore, and I never go back to Michigan. But I still drive, still sleep in the van some nights, still park by lakes and listen to the wind shift in the pines, and sometimes, when I'm quiet, really quiet, I hear it again. That slow, hollow breath behind the mirrors. But it can't touch me now, because I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding. I'm still cold some nights. But I'm not alone, and I am still me. I should have trusted my gut. You always hear that, don't you? Trust your instincts, but when you're tired, when the sun's gone down and your phone's at 5%, when you've been driving for 10 hours through nothing but dry Texas wasteland and washed out billboards, sometimes instincts start sounding like paranoia. And that's when you make mistakes. That's when you convince yourself that a rundown RV park with a flickering vacancy sign is just another quiet country place to sleep for the night. I pulled off Route 90 about 20 miles east of Marfa. It was mid-February, and the desert was colder than you'd expect. Bone-dry winds swept dust across the road, and the horizon was bleeding out orange and purple. I'd been trying to make it to a national park that was still another hour south, but I'd pushed too late. My van, a 91 Volkswagen Westphalia, had started sputtering again, like it always did when I pushed it too hard for too long. That van had gotten me through 5 states, 2 heartbreaks, and 1 engine fire. But tonight, it felt like it was trying to tell me to stop. I saw the sign just as the road curved, a wooden post, crooked, paint flaking off. El Silencio Campground, full hookups, nightly $12. No website, no mention on any camping apps. But I was desperate, and it looked normal enough. There were a few rigs parked inside, older ones, silhouettes backed into gravel slots, lined with dry brush and rusted grills. One guy was smoking outside his Class C with a folding chair and a lantern. He watched me drive in but didn't wave. I pulled up to a small shack at the front. The office. The light above the door buzzed dimly, casting long shadows on the porch. A woman, mid-50s maybe, stepped out before I could knock. Thin, tall, wearing an old flannel shirt that hung off her like it was meant for someone else. Her hair was silvery blonde, pinned up tight, and her face was lined like cracked leather. "You just need one night?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a clipped automatic edge. "Yeah," I said, "just passing through." Her eyes flicked to my van, then back to me. "Cash only, $12. I handed her a 20, and she gave me a handful of wrinkled singles back. No receipt, no check-in form. She handed me a slip of paper with a number on it. Flush 6. "It's over near the back. Stay inside after dark." "Excuse me?" She looked me square in the eye, not blinking. "Just don't wander around tonight. Some of the folks here like their privacy." I chuckled awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. Understood. Privacy respected. But she didn't laugh, just turned and went back into the shack, the screen door creaking behind her. Now, I've been to a lot of back road campgrounds. Some weird, some charmingly rundown. But there was something about this place that didn't feel worn or rustic. It felt watchful, like it wasn't just falling apart, like it was waiting for something, like the land itself had grown tired of being forgotten. Slot number 6 was tucked near the back fence line, between an ancient Airstream with its windows covered in tinfoil and empty dirt patch where a camper might have once sat. I backed in, hooked up power, and tried not to make eye contact with the guy in the Airstream, who I swear hadn't moved since I arrived. I didn't see a single light on inside his trailer. No dog, no radio, just stillness. By 8 p.m., the place had gone dead silent, and I mean silent. No wind, no coyotes, no rustling brush. Even my van's little fridge motor seemed reluctant to hum. I sat at my tiny fold-out table eating a cold sandwich, scrolling through saved maps and audiobooks, trying not to notice how unnatural that silence felt. Like everything outside my van had taken a breath in and just never let it out. Around 8:45, I started hearing it, a soft rhythm, faint at first, like tapping, but not random, measured, purposeful. I leaned forward, straining to hear better. Tap, 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 pause. Then again, tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was someone hammering in a tent stake or fixing something on their rig, but it didn't sound metallic. It was hollow, like knuckles on wood, and it seemed to come from somewhere near the front of the park, maybe the office. I cracked the window, letting in the cold desert air. The tapping stopped. Then a whisper, carried faintly on the wind, or maybe just my imagination, or maybe not. 10, 9, 8. I shut the window. It was too weird. Too deliberate. I told myself it could have been a radio, some local playing a recording. I even considered that the woman at the office had kids and they were just messing around. Anything to make it normal. But deep down, I knew better. I've slept in truck stops with tweakers screaming outside. I've heard wild animals fight for territory in the Rockies. I know what normal weird is. This wasn't that. I turned out the lights and climbed into the pop-top bed, locking the van doors, even though I almost never do. Every creak of the metal frame made me flinch. Every small sound was suddenly amplified. Crickets, shifting tires, my own breath in the silence. At 2:11 a.m., I woke up sweating. Not from a dream, not from heat, from a sound I couldn't place. It was under me, beneath the van. A dragging, like something heavy scraping along gravel. Not fast, not frantic. Slow, intentional. I held my breath and sat up, the pop-top canvas making it hard to see clearly. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I reached down slowly, slipped my phone from the side pocket. No signal, of course. I eased down from the bed as silently as I could, crouched low, listened. Nothing. Then a whisper outside the driver's side window. 6. I jerked back instinctively, hitting my head on the edge of the cabinet. Pain flashed white behind my eyes, and by the time I looked again, the window was empty. I'm not a superstitious person. I've slept in some pretty remote spots, places where locals tell stories about skinwalkers and spirits. I respect it, sure. I stay alert. But I've never actually felt afraid like this. This was different. This was intimate, like the night itself was counting down, and I wasn't supposed to be here. And then the lights came on. All of them. The entire park lit up in unison. Floodlights, porch lights, headlights from every RV in the lot, even mine. It was blinding, like daylight had been turned on by a switch. I ducked down instinctively, shielding my eyes, heart slamming into my ribs. Then I saw them. Figures, walking slowly between the RVs, dressed in black, robes, hoods, barefoot, moving in a circle through the gravel drive like a slow, silent procession. No music, no chanting, just that unbearable silence and their deliberate, rhythmic steps. And then I realized every RV door was open, except mine. I couldn't move. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. The glow from all the lights outside wrapped the van in this surreal haze, like I'd fallen into a dream where something was very, very wrong, but I couldn't wake up. My van was the only one with its door still shut. Everyone else's, those trailers, fifth wheels, campers, stood open like mouths in mid-scream. And the people, those silent figures, kept circling. No words, no acknowledgement. Just the scuff of bare feet on gravel and the swish of those thin, black robes brushing dry earth. I counted 7 of them, though a few were shorter, their movements more erratic, like they weren't quite in step. Children? I ducked down lower, barely breathing, my back pressed to the cold floor of the van. I couldn't tell if they'd seen me, but it didn't matter. I felt it, that deep, unnerving certainty. They already knew I was here. I reached for my keys. My hand trembled as I slid them from the small drawer by the sink. I didn't start the engine. Not yet. That would make noise. That would shatter the stillness and, I feared, trigger something I wasn't ready to face. I had to think. There was no cell signal, no Wi-Fi. No one knew I was here. I hadn't texted anyone since earlier that afternoon. I told myself I'd check in with my brother once I got to Big Bend. That had been the plan. But plans didn't mean anything now. Not in this place. Outside, the procession stopped, right in front of my van. I could hear their breathing, shallow even, close. One of them stepped forward. A woman, maybe, or at least small and slight under the robe. She bent slowly until her face was near level with the driver's side window, which was fogged from my own panicked breath. I stayed still, pressed into shadow, trying to will myself invisible. Her hand rose, pale fingers, palp streaked with dirt. She placed her palm flat against the glass, and then she whispered so softly I almost missed it. 6. My slot number. She said it like a name. Then the others joined in. 666. Over and over, in perfect rhythm, in voices that didn't sound quite human. Too smooth, too synchronized. It was like a ritual. And I was the object. Not a guest, not a camper. A target. Suddenly, all the lights went out. Every single bulb, pitch black, no fading, no flicker. Just gone. Like a switch flipped by something that didn't need wires or fuses. And with the darkness came the cold. Sharp and immediate, like someone had opened a freezer door and shoved me in. I felt the temperature drop 10 degrees in an instant. I didn't wait. I leapt into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned it. Nothing. Just a dry click. I tried again, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Click, click. Then faintly, from the front of the van. Not mechanical, not electrical. Vocal. A low, rising chant. Not in English, not in Spanish. Something older. Monotone. Alien. Wrong. I was shaking now, teeth chattering, sweat slick on the back of my neck. I threw my shoulder into the door, unlocked it manually, and burst out into the night, my boots hitting the gravel so hard I stumbled forward. The figures were gone. No sign of anyone. No footsteps, no whispers. Just the wind, returned now, howling like it had been held back and suddenly set free. I spun around, trying to see in the darkness. The other RVs were sealed tight, curtains drawn, lights off, no movement inside. I could feel eyes, though, watching, from inside, from somewhere else. I ran toward the front of the campground. The office shack. My breath came fast, visible in the cold, dry air. I hit the steps, pounded on the door, nothing. I tried the knob. Locked, I turned, searching for anything, someone, some explanation. That's when I saw the path. A narrow trail leading from behind the shack, barely visible between the brush and the shadowed fence line. It looked recently walked, the dirt pressed flat by dozens of feet. I knew I should have stayed put, locked myself in the van, waited for daylight. But fear does something strange when it hits a certain pitch. It stops feeling like fear. It starts feeling like clarity. I had to know. I followed the path. It wound behind the campground and then down into a shallow dry wash, past dead trees and brittle cactus. The wind hissed through them like teeth grinding together. As I walked, I began to see them, symbols carved into the trees, marked in chalk on rocks. Circles, spirals, a triangle within a square. Some looked ancient, others looked fresh. Then I heard it. Music, a low, droning hum, like throat singing, carried on the wind, and a fire. Just beyond a ridge, I saw the flicker. Orange light dancing against the dirt walls of the wash. Shadows moved across it. Tall, robed figures, just like before. And something in the center. Something tied to a post. It was a man. Stripped to the waist, arms bound, head hung forward. He didn't move. I couldn't tell if he was conscious or even alive. I dropped to my knees, hidden behind a ridge of brush. My body trembled, not from cold anymore, but from something deeper. A primal knowledge that I was witnessing something I was never meant to see. One of the robed figures raised a hand. The chanting stopped instantly. And then she turned. It was the woman from the office. Her face, now lit by firelight, looked different. Not younger, not older, just less human. Eyes too wide, smile too still, skin stretched too thin across her bones. She spoke one word in a voice that echoed off the canyon walls like a bell dropped into a well. 6. And every hooded head turned, not toward the man tied to the post, but toward me. I didn't wait for them to move. The second those hollow eyes met mine across that fire-lit basin, I was gone, scrambling backward through the dust, tripping over roots, snagging my sleeve on jagged brush. My legs barely worked, rubbery and weak with adrenaline, but I forced them to move. Branches tore at my face as I crashed back up the trail toward the campground. The world felt skewed, like the angles didn't line up anymore, like the place itself was rejecting me, trying to twist and trap me in its geometry. Behind me came the chant again. Only this time it wasn't distant. It was coming after me, that humming tone, deep and wet and horrible, rising in tempo as feet pounded the trail. They weren't yelling, weren't screaming, just singing, their song filling the space between breaths and branches and the dark. I reached the edge of the campground just as the first of them crested the hill behind me. I didn't even look back. I ran straight for the van. It stood there, cold and silent, like a grave marker. I wrenched the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I locked every latch I could find, pulled the curtain over the windshield, and dropped to the floor, chest heaving, muscles screaming. The chanting stopped. Silence again. Too much silence. I waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. Then the faintest sound, a scratch low on the side panel of the van. Then another. 3 slow scratches, like fingernails across metal, and then a whisper right at the seam where the door met the frame, barely audible, like breath fogging against glass. 6. It wasn't just a number anymore. It wasn't just my sight. It was me. I lay there on the floor for what felt like hours, every inch of me trembling. My thoughts raced through every worst-case scenario, being dragged out, tied up, turned into whatever it was I had seen down in that wash. I kept thinking about the man they'd tied to the post. What happened to him? What was that ritual? But none of those thoughts were as terrifying as the simple, stark realization that no one was coming to help. No rangers, no neighbors, no tourists or hikers. I was completely alone, trapped in a place people chose to forget. Eventually, as the sky began to gray with the coming dawn, I summoned the courage to peek through the curtain. The lot was empty. No figures. No movement. The other RVs looked unchanged, like mannequins on display. No open doors, no lights, no signs of life. I stepped outside, cautiously, and checked the ground. No footprints. No drag marks, no ash from the fire I'd seen. Nothing. It was like the night had been scrubbed clean. I opened the hood of the van, something I barely knew how to do, and checked what I could. The battery connections were loose. Not just loose, nearly yanked free, like someone had intentionally disabled them. Hands shaking, I fixed what I could, praying it would be enough. I turned the key. The van sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. I didn't pack, didn't check the tanks. I just threw it in reverse, peeled out of Site 6, and sped down that long, winding dirt road without once looking in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I hit Marfa, 2 hours north, and pulled into a gas station, shaking so badly I could barely hold the pump. I checked my phone, full bars, a dozen missed notifications. Time and the real world had returned. But I knew something had changed. I knew I'd touched something ancient and cruel, something hiding beneath the skin of this country, this land, that still bears scars older than roads and towns, and it had looked back. It's been 3 months since I left that campground. 3 months since I started sleeping with a light on and keeping my van within sprinting distance of other people, even in wide open public lands. And I haven't gone back to Texas. Not yet. I still RV camp. Still find beauty in the red deserts and alpine woods and forgotten coastlines. But I'm different now. More cautious, less trusting. More in tune with the signs, the instincts I once brushed off as nerves or silly paranoia. I've learned that not every campground listed on a dusty website is safe. Not every cheap overnight stay is worth the price. And some places don't want visitors. Some places remember. So if you're on the road, wandering this beautiful, broken country in your Volkswagen or Sprinter or Class C, just remember this. If you find yourself off the beaten path, somewhere that doesn't show up on satellite view, if the host speaks a little too softly, if the neighbors don't blink, if the air feels heavy and the wind goes still, don't ignore it. Because not every threat looks like a bear or a mountain lion. Some wear robes. Some smile too wide. Some say your number like it's already written into the dirt. And when the night comes and the fire starts crackling and you hear the chanting rise from the shadows beyond the fence, don't wait. Don't look back. Because if they call your number, they're not calling you to check in. They're calling you home. I didn't believe the warnings at first. They came in as emails, handwritten letters, even a voicemail or two. At first, they felt like folklore, old campfire stories recycled through modern mouths. But they kept coming. People I'd never met, campers just like me, telling me the same thing again and again. Some places are wrong. I've been RV camping across the US for over a decade in my old Volkswagen Westphalia. I've slept beneath ancient redwoods, watched storms swallow the Badlands, driven through Mojave winds that felt like they could peel paint off steel. But this was different. This time I wasn't telling the story. This time I was following theirs. The last message came from a guy named Benji, mid-40s, teacher turned nomad, friendly voice, nervous. Said he'd been camping near a place called Black Hollow Ridge in southeastern Oklahoma. Said he saw something, heard things. Said it was the kind of place that doesn't want you to leave right in the head. And then he stopped responding. So I did what I always do. I drove out. I had no idea what I was walking into. I crossed into Oklahoma from the west, and almost immediately something felt off. The landscape turned from wide desert sky to dense, dark forest. The trees here leaned in strange ways, branches crossing like arms, trunks that looked like they'd been scorched decades ago and never healed. And the farther I got from the highway, the more the road narrowed into what felt like a forgotten path. Black Hollow Ridge wasn't on any of my official RV camping apps, but one of Benji's emails had dropped a pin on an old gravel lot near a dry creek bed. I figured it was a dispersed camping spot, free, quiet, off-grid. Those are usually my favorite. I pulled in just before dusk. The lot was empty. No other vans, no signs, just a tattered wooden fence around what might have once been a horse corral, now half swallowed by weeds and silence. I parked the van and stepped out. Silence. No birds, no wind, just a low pressure in the air like the woods were holding their breath. I shook it off. I'm not the type to scare easy. I got the van set up, popped the top, leveled it out, cracked a cold beer. I even sat out on the little fold-up chair I keep for stargazing. But there were no stars that night. The sky went dark too fast. A thick cloud layer moved in like ink spilling across the atmosphere. It was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, no rustling. Around 9 p.m., the first sound came. 3 knocks, not like woodpecker taps. Heavy, intentional, Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It came from behind the van. At first I thought maybe someone else had pulled in, maybe a ranger. But when I stepped outside with my flashlight, there was nothing. Just trees, and a cold breeze that hadn't been there 5 minutes before. I walked around the van, slowly, light scanning between the trunks. Nothing. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out there?" My voice sounded too loud, unnatural in that quiet. I listened for a reply. None came. Just that growing weight in the air. That pressure, like being underwater. I went back inside and locked the doors. I'm not a coward, but I'm not an idiot either. The knocks didn't come again, but something worse did. At 2:37 a.m., I woke to the sound of a voice. Not talking, not shouting, humming. A woman's voice, somewhere between the trees, humming something soft and slow, a lullaby. I sat straight up in the bed. I thought maybe my phone was playing something accidentally, so I reached for it. Dead. Black screen. Fully charged when I went to sleep. Then I thought maybe someone had pulled up and parked nearby, but the hum was moving, pacing, first to the left of the van, then behind it, then right next to the sliding door, low, wordless, like she was just on the other side. I didn't breathe, didn't move. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence again. I waited until dawn to open the curtain. Nothing outside but mist, thick, white, curling mist. It had rolled in sometime after the humming stopped, and now it covered the entire campsite, clinging to the trees like wet gauze. I packed up fast, didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I just drove. But the fog followed. I left Black Hollow Ridge behind, trying to shake the feeling that I was carrying something with me, like I'd picked up a splinter I couldn't see, buried just under the skin. I made it to a gas station an hour away. Little place called Honey Creek Supply. Dusty windows. Young guy behind the counter who looked up at me like he already knew. "You been out there?" he asked, gesturing at the direction I'd come from. I nodded. Black Hollow Ridge. He swallowed hard. Didn't say anything for a long second. Then, "Folks don't camp there anymore. Not after what happened to the family in '97. I raised an eyebrow. He looked around, like he didn't want anyone to hear him say it. 3 of them. Mom, dad, daughter, disappeared. Left the van behind. Doors wide open. No tracks. No signs of struggle. Just gone. I asked if they ever found them. He shook his head. Only the girl's bracelet, hung up in a tree, 40 feet off the ground. I left that gas station feeling colder than the fog that clung to my windows, and I started thinking about the other messages people had sent me. Other dangerous spots, other places campers warned me to avoid. I'd always been the one telling the stories, but now I was living them. One by one, I started retracing the trails they'd left behind. Next up was New Mexico, an area north of Taos, off Route 64. A guy named Evan had written to me about a dry mesa campground that he said echoed with voices long after you're supposed to be alone. He hadn't given it a name, just GPS coordinates and a chilling final sentence. If you hear whistling at night, don't answer. I'll admit, by now I should have stopped, should have turned the van around and headed for somewhere warm, safe, and lit by the laughter of other campers. But something about these places, was pulling at me, like they wanted their stories told. So I turned east, chasing another voice in the dark. I made it to the mesa by late afternoon. The road getting there was brutal. Rutted dirt washed out in places, thick with red dust that hung in the air behind my van like smoke. My GPS glitched 3 times, freezing for seconds at a time before blinking back on. Each time, the coordinates Evan had given me flickered, like the spot didn't want to be pinned down. The mesa itself was flat and wide, scattered with low scrub brush and jagged boulders that looked melted by time. A single weathered picnic table sat crooked beneath a dead juniper, and that was it. No bathrooms, no signposts, no fire rings, just silence and wind. Always the wind. It scraped against the side of the van as I parked, high and thin like a whisper through teeth. Cold for late spring, and it carried a smell that took me a minute to place, burnt hair and metal. Faint, but there. I stepped out to stretch my legs, hoping maybe I was imagining it, hoping maybe Evan had been exaggerating. But then I noticed something strange in the dust around the site. Footprints. Just one set. No tread marks, no second pair. Small, barefoot. They circled the table, then led off toward the edge of the mesa where the land dropped off into a long, empty gorge. I followed them for a few paces until the wind picked up hard and fast, almost pushing me back like it didn't want me going further. I turned around, set up camp fast, kept the van door unlocked, but stayed inside. That night, I didn't cook, didn't write in my journal. I sat in the driver's seat, eyes flicking between the side mirrors, ears tuned to every scrape of the wind, every creak of the van's metal frame, and around midnight, the whistling started. Soft at first, like someone trying not to be heard. Then louder. Not a tune, not a melody, just two notes, rising and falling. Ooh, ooh, from the south side of the mesa, then again, from the east. Then behind me. 3 directions, 3 different sources, the same whistle. I didn't move. I didn't look. Evan's words came back to me in sharp clarity. If you hear whistling at night, don't answer. But then something happened that made my skin crawl. The van's passenger door handle moved, just a jiggle. 1, maybe 2 inches, like someone testing it, not yanking. Not breaking in, just checking. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and clicked it on, swung it toward the window. Nothing. Then the whistling stopped, all at once, dead silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I stayed up the rest of the night, hand wrapped around my keys, backpack ready to go, eyes bloodshot and dry from not blinking enough. When the sun finally crested the far edge of the mesa, it lit up the world in pale gold. The wind calmed. The van felt lighter, like something had stepped off of it. I got out, needing to stretch, needing to breathe, needing to see that nothing was out there. The dust was smooth now, no footprints, but hanging from the dead juniper over the picnic table was something that hadn't been there the night before. A charm bracelet, old, rusted, handmade, little bones tied together with string, animal bones maybe. I didn't touch it, didn't take a picture, just left. By the time I reached the highway, I was shaking. I pulled over at the first rest stop and opened my laptop, started rereading the dozens of emails readers had sent me, some from people I knew by name, others anonymous. Some even typed and printed, then scanned and sent like they were scared of being traced. I started to see the pattern. Every one of them had mentioned something left behind. A humming voice, a bracelet, a whistle, a touch on the window. Every one of them had felt it, the presence. I thought I could handle it. I'd been to creepy spots before. I'd heard coyotes scream like people, seen lightning strike so close it turned sand to glass. But this was different. These places weren't just strange. They were aware. They watched. They responded. They remembered. I planned my next trip with more caution. I drove east again, toward the Appalachians. Another reader, this one named Claire, had written about a campground that doesn't show up unless you're supposed to find it. Said it was somewhere near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. A bend in the road where the trees close in, and suddenly you're just there. She called it Birch Hollow, said she'd driven past the spot 3 times before it finally revealed itself. Said she never went back. I thought maybe I could catch a glimpse, confirm it wasn't real, cross it off the list. But on the 4th day of driving along those winding, forested roads, I saw it. I wasn't looking for it at the time, just trying to find a spot to pull off and make lunch. But the trees opened in just the right way, and there it was. A hand-carved sign, hanging crooked off a rusted chain. Birch Hollow, Campground number 3. I didn't remember seeing campgrounds 1 or 2. Didn't matter. My hands turned the wheel without me thinking. I pulled in. The dirt road twisted downward fast, shaded in thick birch and hickory. The sunlight filtered in green and gold, but dim, like it was later in the day than it should have been. The road narrowed, then widened. A clearing opened in front of me, and just like that, I was inside Birch Hollow. There were 4 fire rings, perfectly spaced, each with stone benches. A creek ran through the far edge of the site. It looked like a photo from an old Boy Scout catalog. Too perfect. That's when I noticed the birds, or rather, the lack of them. No bird song. Just the quiet rush of the creek and the strange electric buzz that comes when you're being watched. Still, I parked. I couldn't help it. Some part of me needed to see what Claire had seen. I stepped out of the van and immediately felt the air shift. Heavier somehow. Like it clung to my clothes and lungs a little longer than it should have. The trees surrounding the campground weren't that tall, but they leaned in close, their bark pale and smooth like skin stretched over bones. Every leaf seemed to hang still, like even the wind didn't want to disturb this place. I walked the perimeter. No tire tracks in the soft dirt but mine. No fresh ashes in the fire pits. No insects buzzing around the creek. Everything felt suspended. Like time didn't pass here. Like it waited. I should have gotten back in the van, but I didn't. Instead, I sat on one of the stone benches and pulled out Claire's email again. She wrote, "You won't hear anything at first. Then you'll think you hear someone humming by the creek. It'll sound like a child or an old woman. It changes. Don't follow it. Don't try to speak to it. And when it stops, you leave. Right then. Don't wait for morning." The words felt like a dare now, written in bold. Still, I stayed. Maybe I thought I could outsmart the story. Maybe I didn't want to believe this place could really be as dangerous as she described. After all, what could really hurt me here? It was just trees and silence. Right? The first hour passed without incident. I made some tea on my camp stove, read a few pages of an old paperback. I told myself this was fine. This was normal. This was just another eerie but empty campground. Then I heard it. A low, watery humming, like someone singing beneath their breath through a throat full of phlegm, coming from the creek. It wasn't loud. In fact, it sounded almost pleasant, like a lullaby. My heart tightened. It was real. Claire hadn't made it up. I stood up slowly, not daring to speak and not even to whisper to myself. I just walked to the van, trying not to step too loudly. The humming didn't follow me. It didn't rise or fall. It just continued. I climbed in, shut the door softly, and turned the key. Nothing, not a click, not a stutter, just dead silence. The van had been running perfectly. I tried again and again. Still nothing. The humming stopped. Suddenly, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Not the kind of alone where you're just by yourself. The kind where something else knows you're there and wants you to feel it. The hairs on the back of my neck lifted. My stomach went cold. Then came the whisper. Not a voice, exactly. More like a wordless breath pressed against the van's rear windows. Soft, almost gentle. Like someone was standing inches away, breathing fog onto the glass. I didn't look, didn't move, just sat frozen in the driver's seat, heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake the van itself. The rear doors creaked, a slow, soft metallic whine, too slow for wind, too deliberate for animals. Then, nothing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, eyes locked on the dusty dashboard, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion. When I woke, the sun had risen. The air felt normal again. Birdsong returned, faint but present, and the van started on the first try. I didn't ask why. I didn't look around. I just drove, fast. Didn't stop until I reached a gas station with flickering neon and bad coffee somewhere in North Carolina. I sat in that booth for hours, replaying every moment, every sound. Had I imagined it? Had the fear warped my memory? But when I looked at the back window of the van later that day, I saw it, the faint outline of a handprint in the dust. Small, too small to be mine, too real to ignore. I didn't share that story for months. I couldn't. It felt like saying it out loud might invite something back in. But once I started sharing the Birch Hollow story on my channel, coded, half-fictionalized, I got emails. Dozens of them. People who'd seen the same thing. People who heard the humming. People who hadn't left in time and regretted it. That was the first moment I realized something crucial. We weren't just chasing horror stories. We were survivors of something that didn't want to be seen. And that thing? It was still out there, waiting for the next person who didn't believe. The next skeptic with a Volkswagen and a camera and a little too much pride. I told myself I'd stop, that I'd seen enough, that I didn't need to chase every warning. But curiosity is a cruel thing, especially when the next reader email arrived with the subject line, "Do not camp near Devil's Gate, Utah." The email was brief. No greeting, no name, no signature, just this. Do not camp near Devil's Gate, not even to look. If you pass through central Utah, take the long way around. I made the mistake of sleeping there once. I haven't dreamed right since. Attached was a single photo. It showed a twisted rock formation, sharp and arched, like a natural spire hollowed by wind and time, creating a narrow stone gate that rose from the earth like a pair of broken wings. The sky behind it was storm dark, even though the sun appeared to be shining. The land around it looked lifeless, not dry, not dead, just absent, as if color had leached from the ground itself. I wish I could say I heeded the warning, but that photo haunted me. It didn't just raise curiosity, it called something deeper, a need to see it for myself, to prove it was just a trick of light, a rock, a ghost story wrapped in someone else's trauma. The next week, I adjusted my route through Utah. I didn't say the name out loud, didn't mark it on GPS, but the place found me anyway. I was somewhere near Emery County, deep in the San Rafael swell, when I noticed the sky darken, not with clouds, but with tone, like the color had been turned down a few notches. The road dipped, then bent sharply to the right, and there it was. Exactly like the photo. A jagged rock gate rising out of the desert floor, splitting the sky like a blade. Wind swirled hard near the base, but the dust didn't move beyond it, like an invisible barrier held it in place. I didn't want to get closer, but something pushed me forward. Not physically, just enough inside my mind to make hesitation feel foolish. There was a narrow turnout just ahead. I pulled over, engine idling. I could see the gate clearly from here. The rock looked wrong. Not just old, not just weathered. It looked scarred, like something had once clawed its way through. I shut off the engine and opened the door. The wind stopped instantly, no transition. 1 second it roared, the next, total silence, the kind of silence that hurts your ears. I stepped out, feet crunching against gravel that felt too soft, like ash. My van door creaked once behind me, then stayed open. I walked maybe 30 feet toward the gate. Every instinct told me to turn around, and then a voice, no louder than a breath, behind me, my name, not a question, a summons. I froze. It wasn't possible. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I hadn't said my name since leaving the gas station 3 states back, but there it was again, my name, spoken like it belonged to someone else. I turned slowly, expecting to see nothing, but what I saw still claws at the edge of my memory. A figure, not far, maybe 20 feet behind the van, not moving, not breathing, wrapped in something like cloth but not fabric, something old, tight like wet leather left to dry. Its face was covered, no eyes, no mouth, but I knew it was looking at me. I backed away, not toward the van, toward the gate, and the thing just waited, as if choosing when to move. Then without warning, it tilted its head, a full 90 degrees, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. And in the exact moment it tilted, the wind came back. So hard it slammed the van door shut behind me. I ran. I didn't care that the thing didn't move. I didn't care that I was running toward Devil's Gate. I just ran away from it. The ground near the arch dipped suddenly. I stumbled, hit my knees, cut my palms on something brittle and sharp. Small animal bones littering the trail like gravel. Some snapped under my hands. I gagged, the smell hitting me now, thick like rotten salt and old sweat. Then the sound. A scream. Not human, but not entirely inhuman either. It came from the gate, long, deep, and below me, as if the stone was a mouth, and I'd just woken it up. I crawled backward, tripping over bones, slipping in dust. That figure? Gone. Just vanished. I scrambled back to the van, nearly dropping the keys. Got in, locked the doors, started the engine on the 3rd try. Didn't check the mirrors. Didn't breathe until I was 30 miles out and surrounded by traffic again. Even now, months later, I still don't know what I saw, or what it wanted. But ever since that night, my dreams haven't been right either. I see the gate. Every time I close my eyes, and sometimes I hear my name from the other side. That was the last time I chased a location based on a photo alone. The last time I ignored a reader's warning. Because that's when I started to realize these stories, they aren't entertainment. They're warnings. And when someone says don't go, they're not trying to scare you. They're trying to save you. The thing about driving across America in a Volkswagen is this. You get used to solitude, but never silence. There's always something, an engine rattle, wind against the roof, a bird tapping on your solar panel. Some part of the world insisting, I'm still here. I see you. But after Utah, something changed. The van grew quiet. Too quiet. It didn't matter where I parked, how deep into the forest I drove, or how far from cell towers I camped. There was always this vacuum, like the world just stepped back a few feet and decided not to follow. Then came the reader submission that sent a chill right through me. This one had coordinates. No intro, no story. Just a drop pin with 4 words. Camped here. Heard breathing. The location? somewhere deep in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania. I clicked it instinctively, too fast, regretted it immediately. But curiosity isn't a faucet. You can't turn it off once it starts to trickle. And I told myself something I now realize is dangerous. Just check it out. Just one night. The drive to Allegheny was long, like the woods were drawing themselves closer as I approached. The forest grew thicker, older, the kind of green that drinks sunlight and lets none escape. By the time I reached the coordinates, it was past 6 p.m. A clearing sat just off a forgotten trail. No name, no signage, just moss and wet leaves and a circle of blackened stones where someone had built a fire long ago. I parked the van and stepped out into the stillness. No birdsong, no breeze, not even bugs. Like the woods were listening. And then the smell. Not of rot or death, but of wet cloth, like a soaked wool coat left to mildew in a crawl space. It was faint, but enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, found nothing. No footprints, no trash, no signs anyone had camped here in months, maybe years. I almost left, almost. But I told myself again that I was just being paranoid, that the stillness was normal, that the forest was just big and I was just small, and that was fine. I should have known better. That night, I locked the van, shut every window, turned off every light, and laid back, staring up at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Because right around midnight, I heard it. Not a scream, not footsteps, not humming. Breathing. Deep, raspy breathing. Not outside the van. Inside. I bolted upright, held my own breath. The sound didn't stop. It came from behind the cabinets, slow and shallow, like someone half asleep. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in weeks. Something from Devil's Gate. When I tripped in the bone field, I'd opened a gash in my hand. I'd cleaned it. Bandaged it. But what if something hitched a ride? What if it followed me back? I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. No batteries. Dead. Even though I'd replaced them that morning. I turned the van's ignition. Nothing. Again. Again. Nothing. And all the while, the breathing continued. It grew faster. Not louder. Just more urgent. Like it knew I was awake. I grabbed my pocket knife, crawled toward the back of the van, and flung open the rear doors. Moonlight spilled in. Empty. Completely empty, but the breathing hadn't come from outside. It was still inside. I turned slowly, scanning every corner. And there, behind the passenger seat, a handprint, smeared against the inside of the windshield, like someone had tried to climb back out, but hadn't made it. I stared at it, frozen. It wasn't big, about the size of a child's hand, but the fingers were wrong, too long. The spacing, off. And each fingertip left a trail of something oily, like sweat and soot. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at that print, but eventually the breathing stopped. The air felt lighter. The woods seemed to exhale, and just like that, the van started. No warning, no struggle, just a smooth ignition, like nothing had ever gone wrong. I didn't sleep that night, didn't stop driving until I was halfway through Ohio. And the handprint, it faded by morning, gone without a trace. But even now, on hot nights when the van gets still and quiet, sometimes I hear it again. Not loud, just there. A reminder. Whatever found me in Allegheny, it didn't need to speak. It just needed to breathe. By the time I reached the final campground, I was raw. Not just tired, stripped. My sleep was light and nervous. My eyes scanned too often. My instincts stopped asking, what if, and started saying, when. I'd driven nearly 6,000 miles since I started reading your stories. Stories that I thought were about fear. But now I understood. They were about recognition. Each tale wasn't just about ghosts or creatures or cursed land. They were about people. People who saw something they couldn't explain. People who survived when others didn't. And people who needed someone, anyone, to believe them. I believed you now. Every word. The last message I opened was a voice memo. No text, no name, just a timestamp and a file that lasted 36 seconds. It started with rain. Hard rain, metal on metal, like it was hitting the roof of an old RV. Then came a voice, quiet, rushed. I'm at Bear Gulch, Site 19. If you're hearing this, don't come here. I made a mistake. I thought it was just a story. I thought it wasn't real, but it followed me. It wears people. It knows your face. Don't trust what you see. Then the rain stopped, instantly. And one last thing before the clip ended. The exact sound I'd heard at Allegheny. Breathing. Only this time, it ended in a laugh. My laugh. That was 3 nights ago. I spent the next 2 days trying to convince myself not to go. I lost that argument because part of me needed to see where this ended. Bear Gulch Campground was in Montana. Thick pine forest, high elevation, cold even in July. I arrived just before dusk. Site 19 was in the far corner, past a broken sign and a half-buried utility box. No other campers nearby. The space was oddly shaped, long and narrow, like something had burned away the trees in a perfect corridor years ago. I parked, engine running, didn't get out, just sat, watched, waited. Nothing moved, no birds, no rustling, no other sounds. And then, footsteps from the woods behind me. Soft at first, then sharper like boots against gravel. I turned. A man stood there, mid-30s, camp jacket, hiking pants, face clean-shaven, neutral expression. He raised a hand and waved. Casual. Familiar. I rolled down the window an inch. "Hey there," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you. You good?" His voice sounded normal, like a ranger, but something was off. His eyes never blinked. I said nothing. He took a step closer. "You're in Site 19, yeah? You got a reservation?" I nodded, just once. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And that's when I saw it. His shirt, a faded graphic that mostly hidden under the jacket, but I recognized the logo. It was my logo, from the channel. From my merch. He took another step and said something that froze my blood. "Love your stories, man, especially the one about Devil's Gate. You really felt that one." I didn't respond. He smiled wider, too wide. His jaw stretched a little too far, like a rubber mask pulled too tight. And then he blinked, but the eyes stayed open. The lids blinked, not the eyeballs, like a costume had just adjusted. I threw the van in reverse and punched the gas. He didn't chase me, didn't move. Just stood there, smiling that too wide smile. As I tore down the trail, tires spinning in the gravel, I checked the rearview mirror. He was gone, vanished between one breath and the next. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. Didn't sleep that night. Didn't stop hearing my own voice in that recording. Didn't stop seeing my face on someone else's body. I've learned a lot on this road. Not just about fear, but about what fear teaches us. It's not there to stop us from living. It's there to help us recognize danger when no one else does. These stories, they're not warnings about places. They're warnings about patterns, about the way evil moves. Quiet, patient, adaptive. Sometimes it's a sound, a scent, a memory. Sometimes it looks like you. Sometimes it is you. But always it wears something familiar to make you feel safe. So you'll let it in, so you'll stop trusting yourself, so you'll sleep just one night too long in one place too wrong. I left that campground and haven't gone back, but I still hear it sometimes, my voice, in other people's mouths, at other campsites, like something is still telling my story without me. But here's the thing that matters most. I'm still me, because I believed you, because I listened, and because I finally understood. Fear is the map. And your stories? They're the compass. They don't just show us where not to go, they show us how to survive when we get there anyway. So keep sending them, keep writing, keep warning, because someone somewhere is about to make the same mistake, and your voice may be the only thing that brings them back. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who questioned their own memory. I've always been the type who remembers the little things. Dates, scents, odd looks from strangers in grocery stores. You don't spend 5 years living alone in a Volkswagen Westphalia, roaming the backroads of America, and not learn to trust your senses. But what happened to me in the Badlands? It changed that. It made me doubt everything. What I saw, what I felt, even the people I trusted most. It started in late September. The kind of fall that creeps in overnight, smearing the last traces of summer with thin layers of frost. I was headed towards South Dakota after spending the summer hopping between national forests in Montana. The solitude had been good for me, cleansing in a way. I'd spent years trying to outrun something I couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or regret. Probably both. But the wind in my hair, the sun on my face, the constant rumble of the old van beneath me, it helped me forget for a while. When I pulled into the Badlands National Park, I was running low on gas, patience, and food. I didn't plan to stay long. I just needed a place to park for the night and maybe take a short hike in the morning before heading east. I'd heard the Badlands were beautiful, strange, and haunting. Endless layers of eroded rock and prairie, cut deep by time and wind. But that night, as I set up camp at Sage Creek Campground, I felt something I hadn't felt all summer. It wasn't quite fear. Not yet. Just a sliver of unease, like something behind me was watching. Something I couldn't see. I told myself it was the landscape, how it seemed to go on forever, broken only by the occasional silhouette of bison grazing in the dusk. There were no lights out here, no cell service, no rangers patrolling this part of the park. Just me, a few other campers scattered across the field, and the sound of wind scraping through the dry grass. I met a couple that night, Maya and Ian. They were in their early 30s, traveling in a newer Class B RV that looked like a spaceship next to my rusted-out Westie. Nice people. Maya offered me half a bottle of red wine while we stood watching the last light fade from the sky. We talked about the road, the things we'd seen, the places we wanted to go. Ian mentioned how they'd camped here once before, about a year ago, and how it felt off back then, too. "Something's just weird about this place at night," he said, scanning the ridgeline. "We saw lights last time, strange ones." I asked what kind of lights. Planes? Satellites? Campfires? He shook his head. No, they weren't like that. These were low to the ground, moving in unnatural ways. Blue, mostly, sometimes white. Maya looked visibly uncomfortable and changed the subject. We laughed a little too hard at a dumb joke I made about alien cowboys, but I remember thinking, he's not joking, not completely. And I remember how she wouldn't meet my eyes after that. I went back to my van around 10. The stars were brighter than I'd seen in months, bursting out across the sky like shattered glass. I left the curtains open, hoping to fall asleep under them, but sometime around midnight I woke up freezing, even though I'd bundled up and shut all the windows. Then I saw it, faint through the back window. A light, not a star, not a headlamp. A slow-moving, pale blue orb, hovering maybe 10 feet off the ground, just past the nearest hill. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I didn't move, just stared. It was completely silent, and then, just as suddenly, it blinked out. I must have fallen asleep again because I don't remember anything else until morning, except when I got up, there was something on my neck. A mark. Small, like a puncture or a burn. Not painful, just there. 2 perfect circles, almost like snake bites, but smaller, too small. I checked the sheets, the mattress, the whole van. No bugs, no spiders. I tried to convince myself I'd leaned into something sharp the day before and hadn't noticed. But the symmetry of the marks bothered me. They didn't look accidental. They looked intentional. Maya and Ian were gone when I went to look for them. Their campsite was empty. No trash, no gear, no tire tracks. Just grass pressed flat where their van had been. Like they'd vanished. I figured maybe they left early. I didn't think much of it at the time. Plenty of folks pack up before dawn. Still, something nagged at me, like I should have heard their engine or at least a door slam. I didn't plan to stay another night, but when I turned the key in my ignition, the van didn't start. Not even a sputter. Battery was fine, gas tank full, no blown fuses, no explanation. That's when I noticed the smell. Not gasoline, not oil, something faintly metallic. Ozone and copper, like blood and burned air. It was coming from inside the van, but I couldn't find the source. I spent all day tearing through wires, crawling underneath, checking every system I could think of. Nothing. I tried to flag down another camper for help, but the few people I saw kept their distance. Eyes down, avoidant, like they knew something I didn't. That night, the lights came back. I was sitting outside, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars, when I saw the first one. Then another. They moved like fish beneath the surface of a pond. Graceful, gliding, deliberate. Not fast, not chaotic, like they were looking for something. Or someone. One hovered near my van. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. It hovered for what felt like forever. Then it began to pulse. Not strobe, pulse. Slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. My chest tightened, my ears rang. I thought maybe I was having a panic attack, but my body wouldn't move, wouldn't respond, like I was frozen from the inside out. Then, nothing. Just black. I woke up the next morning on the ground outside my van, curled up next to the fire pit. The fire had burned out hours ago. I was covered in dust and dirt. My limbs ached, my head throbbed like I'd been drinking for a week straight, and the marks, there were more of them. This time, not just on my neck, on my wrists, my back. Perfect circles, always in pairs, some big, some smaller. No blood, no bruises, just impressions, like something had pressed into me, something with purpose, something that didn't want me to remember. I didn't scream. That was the strangest part. No panic, no racing through the campsite, yelling for help. I just stood there next to the cold fire pit, barefoot in the dirt, staring down at the marks on my arms, feeling blank. As if my mind hadn't caught up to what my body already knew. Something had happened. Something real. And I wasn't ready to remember it yet. The van still wouldn't start. I sat inside it for over an hour that morning, key in the ignition, hands trembling, eyes darting to the rearview mirror like I expected something to appear behind me. I don't even know what I was waiting for. A person? A shadow? The light? There was a pounding inside my skull. Not pain exactly, but a pressure, like something wanted out, or wanted in. And then I heard it. A low-frequency hum, barely audible. Like a power line buzzing in the distance, except it was all around me. In the van, in the air, in my bones. I opened the door, staggered out into the field, and the hum disappeared instantly. Gone, like it had never been there. I stumbled toward the small wooden signpost that marked the camp's entrance. My mouth was dry, my hands were numb. Something was deeply wrong. And not just with me. That's when I saw the ranger's truck. It was parked just outside the campground boundary, near the service road that leads into the deeper parts of the Badlands. I hadn't noticed it before. The truck was covered in dust, like it had been sitting there for days, maybe longer. No one inside, no gear in the bed. Just sitting there, baking in the sun. I walked toward it slowly, cautious of the silence. When I reached the driver's side window, I saw the door was unlocked, but the key was still in the ignition. The ranger's logbook was lying open on the seat. I flipped through the last few entries, my fingers shaking. 9:14, blue lights seen again over prairie. No aircraft in vicinity. Notified supervisor. 9:18, campers report memory loss, nausea, disoriented, possible contamination event. 9:21, Maya and Ian missing, left no trace, no exit footage on South Gate. 9:23, found one camper unconscious near Buffalo Jump. Small circular burns on arms and chest, similar to last year. 9:25, hum in the valley growing stronger, still can't locate source, recommend closure of Sage Creek. There were more entries, but the ink had bled. Water damage. Or sweat. I don't know. I dropped the logbook like it had burned me. Back at the van, I made the decision. I was leaving. Even if I had to hike out 20 miles to the nearest road, I'd do it. I wasn't staying another night. Not here. Not with the lights, or the silence, or the things that left marks like fingerprints from another world. I packed only what I needed: water, snacks, flashlight, journal. I left everything else. Somehow, I knew I wouldn't be able to come back. Or maybe I didn't want to. I didn't even make it 2 miles before I saw her. Maya. Standing on a ridge about 50 yards ahead, her silhouette motionless in the golden light of afternoon. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Heat shimmer. Memory burn. But then she raised her hand. A wave. I called out her name. She didn't respond. I started toward her, climbing the dry slope, heart pounding like a war drum. My boots slid on loose rock, my mouth cracked open to shout again, but the sound caught in my throat. Because when I got closer, I saw her eyes. They were empty. Not blank. Empty, like something had hollowed them out. Her pupils didn't react to light. Her skin was pale, slightly gray, like she'd been underwater. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stared through me like I wasn't even there. Maya, I whispered. Where's Ian? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, she lifted her arm, slowly, pointed toward the prairie behind her. That's when I noticed the mark, on the inside of her wrist, 2 circles, identical to mine. I turned, followed the direction she was pointing, and saw something far in the distance. Another figure, small and ragged against the endless yellow field. It was Ian. I started running. When I reached him, he collapsed into my arms, barely able to speak. His lips were cracked, his breath shallow. He clutched at my jacket like a drowning man. They're in the sky, he gasped. They watch from below, not above. You understand? Not above. I didn't understand. Not then. He passed out before he could say more. We spent the night behind a cluster of rocks, taking shelter from the wind. Maya never followed. I never saw her again. When I asked Ian about her, he just shook his head, eyes full of tears. She's not the same anymore. They took her, gave her back, but she's not her anymore. I didn't sleep, just stared at the stars, waiting for the lights. But they never came that night. It was the first time in 3 days I hadn't seen them. And it terrified me more than when they were there, because that's when I realized they only show themselves when they want to be seen, when they choose you. And if they've already gotten what they came for, maybe they don't need to come back. Or maybe they already are back, inside. The next morning, Ian was gone. No footprints, no blood, just an impression in the grass where he'd been lying. And beside it, his wristwatch, still ticking. I hiked out alone. It took me 6 hours to reach the road and another 4 to flag down a passing truck. The driver was an older man, didn't ask many questions, just looked at the marks on my arms and said, "You were in the Badlands, weren't you?" I nodded. He didn't say another word the whole way to the nearest town. I stayed at a roadside motel that night, just outside a town whose name I can't remember now. Not because it wasn't important, but because I think I've started to forget things. That's the part no one talks about. The after. The silence that follows the experience. It's not just the fear or the trauma or the scars. It's the forgetting. Like whatever happened out there still owns part of me, and every day it takes a little more back. When I first checked in, I tried to explain to the woman at the front desk why I had no ID, no wallet, no cell phone. I told her the truth, or as close to it as I could. She just looked at me for a long time, then slid the key across the counter without a word. As I walked away, I heard her whisper something under her breath. Another one. I locked the door to the room, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at my arms. The marks were still there. Not scabs, not bruises, just clean, perfect circles. Smooth as glass, cool to the touch. Like they didn't belong to my body at all. That night, I had a dream. Or I think it was a dream. I was back in the van, except it wasn't the van. The walls were too curved, everything was too bright, too silent. There was no sound, no smell, no sensation of weight or gravity. I floated, I waited. Then came the lights. Not outside. Inside me. I felt them moving through my blood, sparking behind my eyes, scanning something deeper than memory, and then a voice, not spoken aloud but in my head, clear as my own thoughts. You wanted to see. Now you've seen. Return and forget. I woke up drenched in sweat, clutching the bedsheets like they were a lifeline. The marks on my arms were gone. I don't know if they ever were real. I don't know what happened to Ian or Maya or the ranger who kept that logbook. I don't even know how many nights I was really out there. But I do know this, I was not alone. And whatever walks beneath the Badlands lights, it's still watching. Weeks passed. I made my way back home, eventually. I kept telling myself I'd report it, to the Park Service, to the police, to someone. But how do you report a missing person when you're not even sure they existed? When your own memories blur like smoke in the sunlight? I still had the ranger's logbook. I'd stuffed it in my pack before I left the truck, thinking it might be important. But when I finally opened it again, back in the safety of my own apartment, the pages were blank. Every single one. No water damage, no smudges, just clean cream-colored pages like they'd never been written on, like they were waiting for me to fill them in. I didn't. For a long time, I kept quiet, tried to go back to life, but the forgetting didn't stop. Names faded, faces blurred. I'd go into the kitchen and not remember why. I'd stand at the gas station pump and suddenly forget where I was driving to. People started asking if I was okay, if I'd been drinking, or if I was under stress. I told them I'd just been camping. Nothing more. But some nights, when everything's quiet, I still see the lights. In my dreams, in the corners of my vision. Reflected in the window of the RV when I'm out in the desert, far from cell towers and city lights. Always hovering, always pulsing, always waiting. You might think I'm crazy. I'd understand if you did. If I hadn't lived it, I'd probably laugh it off too. But I'm telling you this story not to scare you, not just to make your skin crawl or fill your head with ghost stories. I'm telling you because I think the Badlands are a warning, not from something evil, not even from something alien, necessarily, but from something older, something that was here before we ever parked our RVs or pitched our tents, something that doesn't care if we understand it, that doesn't need to be believed to be real. When I went back, yes, I did go back. I wasn't looking for answers. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I went because part of me never really left. Part of me still belonged to whatever that place is. I camped in the same spot. The van started just fine. No lights, no marks, no strange dreams. until the third night. That night, I woke up standing in the same field again, barefoot just like before. And this time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt resigned, like something in me had always known I'd return. The lights were brighter this time, lower, closer. They didn't hover above, they spiraled down into the ground like roots, like veins. And I understood somehow in that moment that they weren't coming from the sky, they were coming from underneath us, from within the land. All that emptiness in the Badlands, those cliffs and ravines and ancient fossil beds, they aren't just geological features, they're mouths, openings, vents from something deeper than history. And the lights are its way of reaching out, of learning us, of claiming us, piece by piece. I left the next morning, no words, no signs. Just a silent promise to myself that I'd never come back. But here's the truth. I don't think I ever really left. And if you camp out there long enough, far from the other RVs, past where the trail maps go, you might feel it too. The hum, the watching. You might forget something simple, your last name, the day of the week, just enough to make you pause. And you'll wonder if it's just stress or if maybe you've been chosen to. So camp smart, stay alert. And if you see strange lights at night, don't follow them. Because once you do, you won't come back the same, if you come back at all.